Gale deadlifted at her, and Jeremiah were all gathered together polishing off a few mechanical adversaries. As he stepped into view, Ether finished hers off last, phasing her arms through its chest and coming out with several components that were apparently quite vital to its operation. It was easy to forget just how terrifying phasers could be given the right talent and training. "There's our big fella," Jeremiah announced. He somehow still looked composed, barely a hair out of place as he whipped the cane-like object in his hand about. With a flick of his wrist it compressed down, and he tucked it neatly away in a compartment of his costume. No great shock that a team full of subtlety heroes would have fancy high-tech weapons, though from the smoking remains around his feet it seemed the cane did far more than just make itself portable. "We clear enough to do this, or do we need to thin the herd a bit more?" Owen asked. The tide had certainly turned in the hero's favor, but the battle was far from finished. He would be damned if he left people hanging when it could be avoided. "I think this is as good as we're likely to get," Jeremiah replied. "Sooner or later, the next wave will show up. Better to be ahead of the curve." Gale and Adder, please maintain our perimeter. Deadlift, handle any who get past them. Titan, if you would be so kind as to grab me a subject. Owen leapt out of the clearing, grabbing a robot that was already short one bladed arm and snapping off the other. He tore off its legs to just for good measure, and then carried his prize past Gale, who was already calling a fresh blast of wind to surround them, setting the torso down on the ground, its head still intact and somehow glaring at them. He motioned for Jeremiah. "You kept the head on?" he asked, pulling a large knife from another compartment. With a single touch of a button on the side, the blade began to glow a fiery red. "I don't know what makes these things register as broken, but being decapitated seemed like a good bet." Owen rested one hand on the bot's metal neck, keeping it pinned just in case it had a trick or two up its sleeve. "You'd be surprised by how many things that doesn't work on," Jeremiah muttered as he spoke. His hands worked quickly, slicing into the torso with surprising delicacy, easily piercing the metal hide to reveal the robot's inner workings. He may as well have cracked open a pinball machine, for as much as Owen could tell, but Jeremiah seemed to have some idea of what he was looking at. After a few minutes of rooting about, he grabbed a dark box that Owen thought looked identical to four others also in the torso and yanked out his strange pen. "On the very likely chance that this blows us up, sorry about the costume." That was all the warning Jeremiah gave before plunging his pen into the device. Owen tensed, not because he expected the explosion would hurt, but because it would still be a damn explosion. None came, however. Instead, a pale blue light near the top of the pen flashed on, and Jeremiah let out a long sigh of relief. "Did it work?" Owen asked. "Maybe it will still take several minutes. Hang on." What? Jeremiah touched his right ear, the universal signal for being on comms, and as he listened his eyes grew steadily wider. Worse, the smug expression always present on his face vanished, and for the first time since they'd met, Jeremiah looked genuinely worried. Finally, he dropped his hand and with a single stroke of his knife carved up the innards of the robot. Guessing something went wrong, and said, "Not with the device per se, with the plan as a whole. They saw us coming, the bastards. These robots aren't being controlled by a central signal. There are 6 signals spread throughout the city, relays to act as redundancies and mask the real source." "Well then, let's go find those." Owen pushed to his feet, ready to charge back into battle. "No need," Jeremiah said, rising more slowly and pulling his cane back out. "According to what my team said, one of those signals should be landing right on top of us in less than 2 minutes. What in the tap dancing fuck is that?" Hexcellent reached out and grabbed Galvanize by the cape, pulling him up short as she pointed to the sky 5 blocks north of their position. So far their plan had been going surprisingly well. The robot forces were scattered enough that Zone was able to sneak the team around the bigger clusters. Between his scouting and Imper's running messages, they'd made good progress in getting closer to the Mortain building. For a moment, Hexcellent had allowed herself to feel cautious optimism about their chances of surviving the day. This was when, almost perfectly on cue, a giant mechanical monster rippled into view and fell from the sky. Hexaline didn't know how something that big had managed to stay out of sight. Then again, the pinnacle of her technical expertise was switching the television's input feeds between game systems. She could tell it wasn't the only one, though. She could see another appear to the south and fall, and she thought she caught a sliver of one to the east. The one nearby, however, she had a perfect view of, And what a view it was. The thing had a base built like an insect. It hosted a half-dozen ultra-thick legs which supported the towering torso, which in turn sported for arms, each ending in what looked like various gun clusters or cannons. The torso itself was heavily fortified, with smaller weapons mounted at regular intervals. Ahead was perched on the very top 8 glowing eyes spaced out to give what Excellent had to imagine was a 360-degree view of its surroundings at all times. Worst of all, which was saying a lot, when one watched a giant mechanical monster shatter the concrete as it landed. Compartments just above its legs were sliding open to release more of the regular-sized deadly robots. What I wouldn't give to have been born a tech controller. Bubble muttered, stunned, as they watched the river of robots pouring out from the massive mothership. Something tells me if that solved the problem, the heroes would have brought one in ages ago. Galvanized said, Excellent, can you have Impers bring back Zone? I've got a hunch we need to rethink our strategy. I can't imagine anything that big would have the capability of focusing just on supers. Yeah, not an issue. As soon as I saw the building-sized mech falling from the sky, I figured we'd need to change place. Zone hopped out from a nearby alley. Impers riding on his shoulder, leaving a small trail of blood where his tiny claws had sank into Zone's shirtless flesh. So that thing probably came to clean house, Excellent said, which means we need to get the hell away from it, and the troops it has, as quickly as possible. Smart money says this whole block will be gone soon if the heroes don't intercept it. And even if they do, that's not a fight I want to be near. She's right, we need to focus on speed now. Bubble agreed. Whoever is doing this clearly plans to level all of Brewster again. Excellent felt a tickle in the back of her mind. Why, unless this was the world's most patient sociopath at work, it didn't make any sense. Criminals acted for a reason: revenge, profit, pride, feeding, and addiction. There was almost always purpose behind their motives. All of this, it didn't really fit. Maybe if there were a ransom demand or banks being targeted, but it just seemed like random chaos, except somehow it was familiar. She couldn't put a finger on it yet. Hexen was certain she'd seen something like this before, maybe in her darker days, the ones hidden behind a cloud of foggy, drug-coated memories. It was there, darting about in her brain, always just a few inches out of reach. Excellent, Galvanized repeated, snapping her attention back to the moment I asked if you'll have Impers scout for us. It's too dangerous to send Zone, but your demon might slip by undetected. Yeah, no problem. She tried to follow the itch in her brain again, but it was gone, scared off by the rational issues she should be handling. Giving a few quick orders to Impers, she took the demon and tossed it into the sky, where it pumped its tiny wings and began to rise. Okay, he's going to do a wide sweep of the block, then come back when Excellent grabbed the side of her head, her knees buckling from the burst of pain. If not for Zone reflexively catching her in mid-fall, she'd have been splayed out on the concrete. As it was, her breath came in heavy, ragged gasps, and there were spots in her vision. Emperor's Galvanized asked. Excellent could only manage a weak nod. Her brain felt like it had blades running across it. She'd never lost 2 of her summons in such rapid succession before. It was a whole new level of pain. Dismissing them didn't hurt in the slightest, but when they were killed, their suffering channeled through the shared link. Each was a part of her, and she felt their destruction on a visceral level. That was why summoners could only have so many creatures, and why the creation of each one took untold effort. One only had so many pieces of their mind to spread around. Damn, Bubble said. No more eyes in the sky. At least Zone got back before he was stuck out there. Galvanized said, if they saw and shot down Impers, we can assume everything non-metallic is probably a target at this point. We'll just have to move fast and hope for the best. Not yet. Hexaline pushed herself off Zone's shoulder, using him as a prop. We need protection. Forget it. You're clearly in no shape to summon anymore, Galvanized told her, and I will be in better shape when the robots carve me to pieces. Excellent shot back. None of us are good in a fight, so we need protection, something to sacrifice. If we need a buffer between us and them, Huggles can be summoned again after I rest. That's not true for anyone else. Galvanized, she has a point. Zone agreed. We might be able to take one of those things if we got lucky and work together, but there's a lot more than one out there. We've got no eyes and no heavy hitters. We need help. Galvanized looked at his team for a long moment before shaking his head. I don't like it. I think it's too risky. but we all know that nothing I say will stop you. So instead of being a naysayer, I'll offer encouragement. Excellent, do your best. Thanks, fearless leader. Excellent straightened her back, held out her hand, and set her jaw. And one of you holes better carry me if I pass out. Dark smoke swirled in front of them, expanding slowly but steadily. Sweat began to drip down Hexence's face as she ignored the pain in her head, which was now turning to an ache that seemed to echo in her bones. She focused on bringing forth the product of her imagination into the real world. She knew every inch of Huggles, every aspect of the demon's being, and she pushed that image to the front of her mind, then further into the cloud of smoke before her. It took almost 20 seconds, the longest summon Hexcellent had ever done, but when the smoke cleared, the familiar bladed arms of Huggles were there to greet them. And that's how you do that. Excellence stumbled as she took a step, but Zone and Bubble both slid their arms beneath her shoulders. She was still conscious, though clearly not by much. Team, we need to get out of here now. Galvanized ordered, run as quick as you can, avoid the robots whenever possible, and no matter what, don't let anyone fall behind. Without another word, he turned toward Morton, made a quick motion for them to follow, and took off in a jog, just slow enough for them to keep up with as they helped Excellent along. He better not try to ditch us. Excellent, said Zone and Bubble both chuckled, even though there was nothing funny about what Galvanize was doing. He'd taken the front position because it was the most dangerous. If anyone were going to be spotted, it would be him, and with as strong as the robots were, that might be a deadly choice. Please tell me there's a backup plan. Owen watched in wonder as the six-legged metal monster fell from the sky. The beast landed with a thunderous crunch, only to blocks away from where he and Jeremiah stood, over the carved-up carcass of a smaller robot. There is sort of. Jeremiah yanked his pen device out of the robot's chest and slipped it back into a pocket on his costume. From what my people were able to figure out, the 6 giant mech-style robots are functioning as relay stations. The universal signal goes to them, and they broadcast it to the lesser robots. It's a good way to make sure people can't use one of the pawns to find the king. Basically exactly what we were trying to do. But there are 2 weaknesses to the tactic. Jeremiah scanned the area, pointing to 2 other giant mechs as they fell in their line of sight. Most importantly, at least for the time being, from the way that the big bots are scattered about, I guess there's a range limit to their relay capacity. That means if we take them down, the smaller ones, depending on the signal, might be cut off. Won't be easy, but I think we can swing that. Owen replied. Already the heroes around them were shifting focus, taking note of the new wave of bots that was pouring onto the battlefield from the innards of the giant mech. What's the second weakness? Those big ones must be connected to the master signal, Jeremiah said. So our original plan is still valid. If I can somehow get access to the receiver inside one of those, we might be able to track down the source. Owen sized up the massive opponent that was already firing off rounds of bullets and lasers at every hero advancing on it. That is a lot of metal to root through for one little box, which is why we should focus on knocking out the first 5, especially if my theory on the signal range bears out. For the 6th, we take our time and see what we can uncover. Jeremiah said the presented plan has merit, but current damage potential for Brewster is approaching catastrophic levels. Dispatch's voice came to their ears without prompting. It was easy to forget that while she usually replied only when addressed, Dispatch was technically listening to everything one said while wearing a calm. That was how she knew every detail of a battle without heroes having to constantly check in. Jeremiah, I can only allow approximately half an hour for you to test your plan. Currently, evacuations of areas near the large robots are being undertaken, but there are too many of the smaller models to be allowed to spread. They must be taken out while they are centralized. Right now, we are saving as many civilians as possible. If you can neutralize the small units by stopping the large ones before evacuation is complete, I can allot more time. If you cannot, then all Manhattan-level heroes will receive authorization to terminate the army. Not for the first time, one was glad he'd never tried to go into the DVA like some of the other retired heroes. The call to wipe out entire city blocks wasn't necessarily a wrong one, as those robots could do a lot more damage if they spread out. Still, there was no way to completely evacuate this much of the city. No matter how many supers the DVA pulled in, casualties were going to be inevitable. but it might be less than what the city would face if it became overrun with robots. There were no perfect calls, only ones that might minimize the damage. Understood. Dispatch. Jeremiah licked his lips as he stared at the mech eyes, taking in every facet and weakness it presented. Our best bet is probably to focus fire on one of them, show proof of concept. Once we know that destroying the large ones knocks out the smaller bots, we can shift to just taking out the big boys. We don't have long, so tell me where I'll do the most good. Owen said. There's one more item for Titan. Dispatch continued, breaking into the short silence they presented. You requested to be kept abreast of your team. They were unfortunately in the landing zone of another of the 6 giant robots. From what I've been able to track, it seems Hexcellent is injured, and they are still attempting to reach the modern building. The ground beneath Owen shattered. He looked down, expecting attack, only to realize that he'd shifted his weight without holding back. A second's loss of focus, and the world around him crumbled. Dispatch. How are their chances? Do they have a clear path? They are near the central point where more of the smaller units are swarming. Even if we could spare evacuation personnel, their situation is too dangerous. I'm sorry, but they have very small, almost negligible odds of surviving. Owen's eyes swept around to Jeremiah, who nearly jumped back at the ferocity on Owen's face. I need to go. I know. Dispatch had me patched into. Can you manage without me? Can I manage? Titan. Look around. There are dozens of heroes for me to work with. I can still easily make this happen. In fact, I'll do you one better. Dispatch. Have Gale join Titan and me, Jeremiah said. Moments later, the wind manipulator settled to the ground a few feet away, glancing back and forth between Owen and Jeremiah. What do you need? I need you to take Titan to his team, Jeremiah told her. Dispatch can give you the coordinates, but time is of the essence. I'm sorry, did you just ask me to play taxi while there's a giant robot a block away tearing up my town? The wind seemed to pick up as Gale spoke, swirling around them in a not so subtly threatening manner. No, I'm asking you to help me diversify our efforts. Jeremiah pointed to the mech under all out assault from the other heroes. We need to kill one of these things, and soon. But there's always the chance that the one we got is a lot stronger than the others, or has a secondary relay. It's the one that was dropped on the heroes. We need to assume that wasn't an accident. Titan's team is right on top of another one farther into Brewster, possibly under attack from it now. Titan, what are you going to do if you come upon one of these things trying to kill your team? I'll kill the son of a bitch first, Owen said without hesitation. Exactly. So if I'm going to split off to heroes to try and topple one of the other big bots, I'd like it to be a pair that actually has a chance of succeeding. The leader of the strongest hero group in Brewster and a living legend. Jeremiah patted both of them on their shoulders. Can you think of any other duo with a better shot of pulling it off? There might be others that are a better fit, but I can promise you there are none more motivated. Owen turned to Gale, whose skepticism was beginning to melt. Please help me get there. I promise I'm going to help keep your town safe. I'll do it, but I'm not so sure even the two of us can bring down one of those. Gale said. If it's attacking my team, it's going down. Trust me. For a moment, Owen was gone. All the gentle kindness and tempered power of a man who'd seen too much vanished. In his place was Titan, the hero whose name was whispered among criminals like a demon's curse, the man who no super had managed to stop, who'd used his bare hands to rip apart many an allegedly unbeatable foe. In that instant, Gale did trust him, and she felt a surge of pity for any who tried to get in his way. Just don't get motion sick, she warned. I'm not the gentlest ride. When I'm in a hurry, things were going okay until the building collapsed. While their situation wasn't perfect, so far they'd managed to avoid being caught by any robots. Excellent had even started running under her own power as the worst of her headache finally began to ebb. However, avoiding being caught was not the same thing as avoiding detection, and as they ducked and veered between alleyways, the sounds of pursuit could always be heard at their backs. For possibly the first time since joining Morton, every one of the team members were all simultaneously grateful to Mr. Green. Without his ridiculous exercise requirements, their stamina might have flagged out already. As it was, they were weary, but knowing they were only 10 minutes or so from the potential safety of Morton gave them all the energy needed to push through. Then, unfortunately, a 3-story building next to the alley they were in tipped forward, pushed by an unseen force on the other side. Bricks and debris began to rain, the only warning they got as the building started its descent. Bubble reacted quickly Instead of throwing an orb around herself, she made a series of them overhead to create a sort of canopy to protect them as they ran. It wouldn't be enough to actually halt the building, which was already more splinters than structure, but it might let them make it to the other side. Zone was only a few feet ahead of her, not daring to leave the safety of her orb canopy. Galvanized, by virtue of being in the lead, was already clear of the collapsing obstacle he had halted ostensibly to wait for his team, and was gesturing at Bubble frantically. At first she thought he wanted her to hurry, so that was what she did, manifesting more orbs in front of her as she ran, trying not to think about the toll that creating so many was taking already. Her hands were starting to shake, but she pushed through. It was only when she got closer that Bubble realized Galvanize had been pointing past her to where she'd been running from. With a heart suddenly full of dread, Bubble looked over her shoulder. Excellent, who'd been only a step or two behind her when the collapse started, was all the way back on the far side of the building, standing next to Huggles. Maybe she had tripped, maybe the fatigue had gotten the better of her. Whatever the reason, she'd been separated in the chaos of trying to outrun a falling building. Neither Bubble nor Zone had noticed. Bubble slowed and turned to try and head back, but even from this distance she could see Excellent shaking her head. It was too late, and they both knew it. If Bubble went back now, she'd get caught in the collapse. Already there was too much debris raining down to deflect. There was a chance that she could put an orb around herself to survive it, but the shaking in her hands was getting worse. She'd already drained too much of herself. Even if she did survive, what good would it do? By the time Bubble got out, the others would be long gone, either safe or caught. There was no way to save her friend. Excellent was clear of the building, but they'd all heard the robots getting closer. She was trapped, and it would be a matter of minutes until they caught up to her. Fuck that. Bubble turned back around and ran toward Galvanize. Again, Zone right beside her. Maybe she couldn't go back for Excellent, but that didn't mean she had to stand around and let her friend die. She would get out of here, double back down the next block, and reunite with the team summoner Excellent had. Huggles, she could survive for a little while even against the robots. Excellent was tough. She could do it. She had to, or Bubble would never forgive herself. Unfortunately, they made it no further than the mouth of the alleyway before the massive shadow fell across them. It was bittersweet watching her friends run to safety, even as the sounds of robots drew closer. By the second Excellent wanted to see them make it. It was her own fault that she'd stepped into a pile of loose rubble and gotten her foot stuck. If she'd called out, they would have waited, helped her get free, and turned the delay into 5 seconds rather than 10. But she hadn't. She'd stupidly tried to struggle free on her own instead of counting on the people around her, and it had cost her a chance at safe passage. That was her mistake, though. She'd be damned if she let Bubble try and pay the price for her, which was why Excellent waved her off. It would be a comforting thought in the end. She hoped to at least know her friends made it out safely. Heavy steps in the center of the alley revealed 3 robots, each built like the ones she'd seen from footage shot during the previous attacks. Their eyes glowed as they assessed her, though the sword-armed demon a few feet closer naturally drew more attention. There was no need for blustering. The situation had its entire context laid out before them. Kill or be killed. Slice em up. Huggles, the demon, lunged forward, taking a wide swing with both of her arms. The robots stepped nimbly aside, but Huggles was faster than she looked and pressed the attack. One of those arms made it through the torso of a robot. Excellent was about to let out a whoop of joy, however it morphed into a cry of pain midway up her throat as the other 2 robots used the opportunity to forcibly tear Huggles' head from her shoulders until she dissolved back to smoke. As she released a dull, half-choked whimper, Excellent fell hard to the ground. In comparison to the pain in her head, the impact barely registered. Her vision was nothing but static and spots, and she was pretty sure blood was pouring from her nose. Every nerve in her body felt like it was on fire. She tried to take refuge in the fact that the pain probably wouldn't last too long. After all, she was about to die. Despite what she'd expected, that thought provided no comfort at all. It only made things worse. She didn't want the pain to end. She didn't want to die. She wasn't done, yet wasn't ready to walk out of the world. How many years had she pissed away? And only now, when things were getting good, Was she going to get killed? It sucked. Hexcellent tried to get angry, to force herself to rise from the ground and die on her feet. All she managed was to tilt her head slightly upward, gaining a view of the approaching mechanical legs. As fury failed, her fear set in. This was it. There was no last rally in her, and the heroes were scattered. This was how she died. She wished Spider was here to whisper kindly with his poorly hidden accent, or her team, to remind her that she'd managed to make a few friends in the world, or Titan, though of course if he were here she wouldn't actually be in danger now, would she? But they weren't. Excellent. No. Hannah was going to die alone in the streets of Brewster, and that was what scared her most of all. The fear stripped away her mental armor, all the defensiveness and walls she'd spent a lifetime building, as she curled up on the concrete waiting for the end to come. She felt the terror wash over her in a way she hadn't since childhood. She wasn't a corporeal or a super. She was just a helpless person, afraid of the approaching unknown, the coming darkness, wishing with all her might there was at least someone else there to hold her hand. Somewhere in the deepest part of her mind, a familiar presence not felt in decades stirred. Hexaline's body spasmed, something like a seizure, causing her to convulse violently. Her consciousness slipped away a mercy as this finally separated her from the pain, which was growing even more intense above her. The robots stared at the sudden thrashing, unsure of what to make of it. They were so focused on her, in fact, that neither saw the massive furry, elongated foot as it slammed down on top of them, grinding both to scraps. A soft paw reached down from the sky, delicately scooping Excellent's battered, but not yet broken body into its grip. Though still unconscious, she nuzzled into the fur and let out a small peaceful sigh. What in the fucking hell is that? Owen followed the direction of Gale's pointing hand, squinting to see through the wind. His jaw dropped. Years spent as a hero dealing with supers of every manner had exposed him to many a strange situation. He'd seen the rules of reality twisted, if not outright defied, in more ways than he could have imagined back when he started. He had not, however, previously come across a 20-story tall bunny rabbit standing on its hind legs, wearing a suit of medieval armor and breathing fire on the cluster of robots trying to attack it as a few tried to run from the flames. It well hopped forward, smashing them and a large chunk of the street into oblivion. Owen took some comfort in knowing that it was apparently on their side, or at least that it hated robots. Please tell me that's some hero I somehow missed in my research of Brewster, Owen said. Pretty sure I'd remember someone like that, Gale replied. By the looks of it, the smart money is either on shifter summoner or tech genius creation. That shift would take hours if not days to get in and out of. Tech genius maybe, but we've been on watch for that sort of stuff, so I can't believe we'd miss it. As for summoner, I don't know of any who can pull in something that big. Plus combat bunny, who Owen's words trailed off as he remembered the night that he and the team sat around sharing embarrassing stories Hexcellent had told them about her childhood bunny, but said she couldn't call him anymore. Granted, she hadn't described him as able to step over buildings, yet Owen's gut still screamed that the coincidence was just a little too much. Gale, can you sweep the area and get me coordinates on the big robot near my team? I need a few minutes here. Are you going to fight the rabbit? Because even for you, that's a pretty big one, Gale pointed out. I really hope not, Owen said, but I may have just found one of my team. I need to check on her, and if things go well, I might even get us a helping paw. Boo, Gale jeered. Fine, but I'm giving you the quick drop, and I'm coming back as soon as I find our target. Wouldn't have it any other way. Owen barely got the words out before a blast of wind sent him hurtling forward. He ripped through the air before slamming to the ground 50 feet in front of the massive rabbit. Its ears twitched, and it turned to face him, those beady black eyes gazing down at the sudden new arrival. They weren't natural looking, more like they'd been based on someone's toy stuffed rabbit than one with actual eyes. It had the dual impact of being disturbing and reassuring, as Owen felt his hunch might be on the money. Hopcules, I hope. Owen cupped his hands and yelled in case the ears were just for show. The rabbit only watching him before turned further, giving him its full attention. Slowly the creature leaned forward. Owen could actually feel the hot breath from its pink nose despite the distance between them. If this really was a summons, then it was incredible to create something this big, this capable of independent action. Surely put whoever made it among the top 1% of all known summoners. Even better, if it was still standing, then its creator had to be alive. I'm A friend of excellence, Owen yelled. Talking to a rabbit was a bit odd, though, given its size and armor. Perhaps it shouldn't have been. I wanted to make sure she was safe. Hopkins peered at him warily. Owen had no idea how much it knew about Hexcellent or her life. He just had to hope that as long as she trusted him, it would be enough. For the bunny moving in closer, the nose sniffed him twice. Evidently, this satisfied some unknown test, and it held up its right paw, uncurling its fingers, which Owen was certain real rabbits didn't have to reveal the battered but breathing body of Hexcellent. On instinct, Owen took a step forward, and immediately the paw closed. He started to protest, then thought better of it. What was he going to try that the rabbit wasn't already doing? Owen wasn't a healer. He couldn't fix her wounds, and he'd have to protect her from the robots flooding the city. While she was unconscious, confident as Owen was in his abilities, even he could concede that a giant fire-breathing monster who knew only loyalty might be better suited to the task. I'm going to come back with a healer, Owen yelled. He didn't know if Hopkins understood what a healer was, or if the rabbit even had a grasp of the English language. But so far, their communication had been going well. Besides, he didn't have a lot of other options. Someone to make Excellent better keep her safe. Until then, Hopkins snorted, and Owen had to wonder if an imaginary bunny was annoyed with him for trying to tell it to do what it had already planned. That thought alone made him really want a beer. But as Hopkins, their options, someone to make Excellent better keep her safe. Until then, Hopkins snorted, and Owen had to wonder if an imaginary bunny was annoyed with him for trying to tell it to do what it had already planned. That thought alone made him really want a beer. But as Hopkins pulled back up to a standing position, turning to the new robots that had begun to pour into the area, Owen also felt a sense of relief. One member was standing position, turning to the new robots that had begun to pour into the area, Owen also felt a sense of relief. One member of his team at least was safe. Dispatch, this is Titan. We've got a giant summon shaped like a rabbit that's probably hitting a few people's radars. Let them know it's friendly, and anyone who attacks it without cause will personally answer to me. When this is over, if you can get me a healer to the location, we might be able to start using it as a more precise resource. A healer? Is the rabbit injured? If Dispatch felt at all odd asking such a question, it didn't come through much as Owen wanted to chalk it up to her usual demeanor. The truth of the matter was that this probably didn't even register on her weirdness scale. After all, she was in the ear of every hero across the country. There was no telling what manner of crazy shit she'd witnessed. The rabbit is fine. Its summoner is in bad shape, though all it's doing right now is keeping her safe. Once she's conscious again, she can give some proper orders. Titan, please repeat. Did you just say that the summoner who called forth that thing is unconscious this time? He did hear the shock in her voice, and it only took a second to realize why. Usually summons disappeared when their creators went down. They were, after all, manifestations of their creators' thoughts. When the thoughts ended, so did the summons. At least, that's how it generally went. Every super was different. After all, confirmed summoner is out and the rabbit remains. Owen told her, so maybe double time on that. Healer resources are tight, but I'll see what our creators' thoughts. When the thoughts ended, so did the summons. At least, that's how it generally went. Every super was different. After all, confirmed summoner is out and the rabbit remains. Owen told her, so maybe double time on that. Healer resources are tight, but I'll see what I can do. Blow too many. But that hadn't happened. Gale had gotten them clear and was likely lifting them somewhere safe before she rejoined the battle. Owen grabbed another robot and shredded it into pieces, then hurled both at the mech. His projectiles weren't doing any real damage, but he was definitely holding the thing's attention, drawing occasional rounds of bullets and energy, neither of which caused Owen to so much as stumble. Dispatch, what's the situation with civilians around me? The area. But he was definitely holding the thing's attention, drawing occasional rounds of bullets and energy, neither of which caused Owen to so much as stumble. Dispatch, what's the situation with civilians around me? The area. Dispatch assured him. Also, Gale has requested a direct connection to your comm. I accept, Owen said, and seconds later Gale's voice came blasting in his ear. Titan, jump as high as you can right now. I'm en route, but there's no time to waste landing. I found the big bot and your team, which are in the exact same place. We've got maybe a minute or two before they're in deep, and I can't fight one of those on my own. They need our help now. Without pause, Owen pushed off so hard that the ground buckled Under his power, as he went flying upward nearby, he could see Hopkules smashing apart every robot that came near it. Personally, Owen had always thought dogs to be the best of all pets, but he was beginning to see the appeal of rabbits. If having to, they hoped, momentarily leave hectic wasn't bad enough, which it certainly was. The Morton team found as soon as they emerged that they weren't the only ones moving. The giant mech was also making progress, though it had gone through structures rather than darting around them like the supers. It had been what caused the collapse. No doubt it seemed to be chasing a few people that were trying to escape from its sight. The only actual upside of walking into the mech's shadow was that there was so much chaos. A few people in costumes didn't draw much attention. "Fuck me," Zone muttered, gazing up at the machine. With wide-eyed terror, Galvanized grabbed his shoulder and jerked him forward, snapping the shirtless man out of his trance. "Come on, we either run or die, and my legs can still move." Even as the words left his mouth, Galvanized knew how hollow they were. The street before them was sheer madness, with the smaller robots swarming across the ground. Add in that the way behind them was blocked, and that the giant bot could easily reach them with one step of its insect-like legs. Their chances of surviving the next few minutes were looking slim. But Galvanized had faced death before. Not every rescue they went into was without risk, and he refused to let death take him. Standing still, whether by crushing legs or a murderous robot, death would have to at least catch them. They raced along the fractured city streets, trying to take cover by nearby buildings. All thoughts of direction were gone from their minds. Mordant was no longer their goal now. All they cared about was surviving. From one footstep to the next, they picked their path, strategically minimizing their contact with the robots whenever possible. It was a game of numbers, one that was quickly turning against them. More and more of the smaller units seemed to rain down from the sky, and the places to hide were quickly running out. Something gigantic could be heard stomping around a few blocks away, which they all took to mean another mech was in the area. It was a bad scene, and only getting worse. Then, almost as if a beam of light from the heavens shone down to show them the way, Galvanized spotted something that gave him hope. A small alley, its entrance almost completely obscured from view, which would take them in the opposite direction of the robot hordes. It might even give them a chance to circle back for Hexendent if luck was on their side. And since they would have to race all the way around the giant mech to reach the exit, luck would pretty much have to be silently. He tapped Bubble and Zone on their arms and pointed to the alley down the street. It was hard to see as the giant mech's legs blocked out so much of the view, but eventually they realized what he was showing them will never make that. Bubble told him there are too many small robots on the periphery. We're barely hiding from them as it is. If we try and go all the way around, we'll be caught for sure. Probably so, but we still have to try, Galvanized said. What if we went under its own motion to the ample space between the robot's legs? One could drive a bus under there and still have ample clearance, so it wasn't an issue of space. But Galvanized couldn't imagine that the area was undefended, not on a machine built for such destructive ends. It's probably more dangerous underneath, Galvanized speculated, seeing as the edges are definitely going to get us killed. I'm weirdly okay with probably more dangerous. Bubble said, whatever we do, let's just do it soon. Time is against us despite all the preparation and training that Pier's teams had to undergo. The decisions that resulted in life or death often happened in split. Seconds. Galvanized knew they had to move, and the alley might be their one shot at living. His team was right. The long way was basically a guaranteed death, risky as running under a giant killer robot might be. It was the better choice, of course. That didn't mean either choice was actually going to keep them alive, but Galvanized shoved that thought out of his mind as he raced forward, motioning for the others to follow. They sprinted in the one direction. No one else was going toward a mech currently knocking down entire buildings. It struck Galvanized that the world seemed to go curiously quiet as they ran between two of the 6 metal legs. All the madness that had been filling their ears was somewhat blocked by the impossibly big structure around them. It was peaceful, though not in a way that brought him comfort. No, this peaceful was like that of a cemetery or a watery cave left unexplored for centuries. It spoke of darkness buried just beneath the surface, waiting for a chance to arise once more. That chance didn't take long to surface. They were no more than 10 feet along in their journey when Galvanize caught sight of a red glow in the corner of his eyes. No time to think, another split-second decision that might cost him or his team their lives. That chance didn't take long to surface. They were no more than 10 feet along in their journey when Galvanize caught sight of a red glow in the corner of his eyes. No time to think, another split-second decision that might cost him or his team their lives. To the side, Galvanize yelled, leaping away from where he'd been standing moments before. A searing beam of energy struck the concrete bubble, and Zone had moved on his orders and managed to avoid the shots. As yelled, leaping away from where he'd been standing moments before. A searing beam of energy struck the concrete bubble, and Zone had moved on his orders and managed to avoid the shots coming at them as well. However, now that he'd stopped, Galvanize looked up to the source of the attacks and felt his heart drop. All along the underside of the robot were at least 24 glowing red circles, each of which could roast him and his team alive. Another 3 fired, but before they could hit, a wall of blue energy appeared in front of them. Bubble was stooped down, arms held out as she focused. Underside of the robot were at least 24 glowing red circles, each of which could roast him and his team alive. Another 3 fired, but before they could hit, a wall of blue energy appeared in front of them. Bubble was stooped down, arms held out as she focused on keeping the orb around them in place with every shot that landed her body. Orb around them in place with every shot that landed her body seemed to shake. Maybe if the day had just begun, she might have been able to keep it up for a while. But as it stood, Galvanized knew she was only buying them a few extra seconds, maybe a minute tops. Galvanized racked his brain, trying to think of something, anything he could do to get them out of there. He considered Zone's abilities, Bubble's power, and what he could augment, but no matter how he turned their situation around in his hands, maybe a minute tops. Galvanized racked his brain, trying to think of something, anything he could do to get them out of there. He considered Zone's abilities, Bubble's power, and what he could augment, but no matter how he turned their situation around in his head, nothing provided even a glimmer of hope. They just weren't strong enough. Each of them might be supers, but this was the sort of situation even heroes would have trouble with, and none of them had power on that level. Galvanize had been determined to at least die trying, and now it seemed that was exactly what they were going to do. Getting tired, more and more beams were locking onto them. Bubble seemed to be fading. Their time was almost up. All that remained were the few precious seconds she'd bought them, so Galvanized decided to make use of her gift. Zone. Bubble, I just want you to know how proud I am of both of you and of all we've accomplished as a team. No matter what happens next, try to take comfort in the fact that we are among the few who can say we left this world better than we found it. Bubble's arms fell, and the orb around them flickered out of existence. Galvanize all his bravery spent on serve. No matter what happens next, try to take comfort in the fact that we are among the few who can say we left this world better than we found it. Bubble's arms fell, and the orb around them flickered out of existence. Galvanize all his bravery spent on surviving this long closed his eyes. He'd done enough. Staring down a firing squad wasn't the way he wanted to. Closed his eyes. He'd done enough. Staring down a firing squad wasn't the way he wanted to go. Instead of hot searing pain ripping apart his body, however, Galvanize felt a tremendous blast of wind strike and send him spinning roughly through the air. When he finally landed and managed to pull his eyelids apart, he was no longer trapped beneath the robot. Instead, Gale was staring at him, at his whole team, who were miraculously unhurt. She floated above them, lit by the afternoon sun, which they could once again see. Her wind had blown them some distance from the mech, which seemed to be beneath the robot. Instead, Gale was staring at him, at his whole team, who were miraculously unhurt. She floated above them, lit by the afternoon sun, which they could once again see. Her wind had blown them some distance from the mech, which seemed to be distracted. About time you dropped that shield, Gale said. I've been trying to get you out for the past 30 seconds. Titan, your people are clear. Time to step it up. Titan is here, Bubble asked, turning her head in a vain effort to find their hero. Liaison Shores, who do you think kept that thing distracted? Gale asked. But now that you're out, he's going to stop playing so nice, and as soon as I get you three a little higher and safer, I'm going to help. Wait, Galvanize yelped. Hexaline needs your liaison. Shores, who do you think kept that thing distracted? Gale asked. But now that you're out, he's going to stop playing so nice, And as soon as I get you three a little higher and safer, I'm going to help wait galvanize, yelped Hexaline. Needs your help more. She got trapped a few blocks behind us. Gale merely smiled as a new gust of wind began to lift them up from the ground. Excellent is probably the best off of anyone here. Don't worry, you'll definitely see it from the rooftops. Tighten your people are clear. Owen's whole body tingled with relief at those words, aided as a new gust of wind began to lift them up from the ground. Excellent is probably the best off of anyone here. Don't worry, you'll definitely see it from the rooftops. Tighten your people are clear. Owen's whole body tingled with relief at those words, aided a bit perhaps by the energy blast. One of the robots nearby was trying to kill him. With it had been hard letting Gale be the one to go save them, trusting her to make sure. The energy blast. One of the robots nearby was trying to kill him. With it had been hard letting Gale be the one to go save them, trusting her to make sure. They survived, but part of being a hero was accepting that no one was the best at everything. For rapid extraction, Gale's abilities were better suited than his. And he was certainly the superior choice for a distraction still ever since she'd left his sight. And he begun ripping up robots and throwing them at the big mech. His heart had been filled with worry that something would go wrong. He'd already abilities were better suited than his. And he was certainly the superior choice for a distraction still ever since she'd left his sight. And he begun ripping up robots and throwing them at the big mech. His heart had been filled with worry that something would go wrong. He'd already failed so many people who depended on him throughout his life. Losing his team might be one. People who depended on him throughout his life. Losing his team might be one. Was a business district that began evacuations during the first wave of attack. Dispatch told him the last stragglers were seen fleeing several minutes prior. Though not all were successful by current accounts, the area is considered fully evacuated. Glad to hear it. And my clearance for property. The DVA has ruled that if Jeremir's theory proves true, targeting the large robots would be far more prudent than fully unleashing metal. By current accounts, the area is considered fully evacuated. Glad to hear it. And my clearance for property. The DVA has ruled that if Jeremir's theory proves true, targeting the large robots would be far more prudent than fully unleashing Manhattan-level heroes. They want to see a big one dropped as soon. They want to see a big one dropped as soon as possible, and with the civilians gone, you are in one of the best positions. Clearance is full. Demolition. Do what's necessary to bring your target down. Dispatch instructed. Understood. I'll still try to minimize where I can. It wasn't always possible to get DVA clearances in the heat of battle, but for a fight this big, Owen knew damn well doing so would make things easier. There was going to be a lot of cleanup and insurance claims when this tried to minimize where I can. It wasn't always possible to get DVA clearances in the heat of battle, but for a fight this big, Owen knew damn well doing so would make things easier. There was going to be a lot of cleanup and insurance claims when this was all said and done, and the last thing he needed was to be held for reckless destruction. But now they'd given him their blessing, and he knew the area was as clear as possible. He could finally get down to work. You know, I've had to fight robots before, not this many or this often, but your kind pops up from time to time, held for reckless destruction. But now they'd given him their blessing, and he knew the area was as clear as possible. He could finally get down to work. You know, I've had to fight robots before, not this many or this often, but your kind pops up from time to time when some smart super wants a machine to do their dirty work. Owen grabbed a pair of the robots that were trying to attack and crushed them in his hands, scattering their debris as he moved forward. Another came at. Smart super wants a machine to do their dirty work. Owen grabbed a pair of the robots that were trying to attack and crush them in his hands, scattering their debris as he moved forward. Another came at him. Seconds later, it was in pieces with no other heroes or civilians around. He didn't have to worry about where the hurled shrapnel might land. Personally, I'm not really a fan. I prefer opponents who can think on their feet and maybe use enough wisdom to give up when they know the fight is unwinnable. This time, 5 of them ran for him. Owen met them. Didn't have to worry about where the hurled shrapnel might land. Personally, I'm not really a fan. I prefer opponents who can think on their feet and maybe use enough wisdom to give up when they know the fight is unwinnable. This time, 5 of them ran for him. Owen met them head on. The things were strong, no doubt about it, but Owen had fought stronger, and that was all it took. Raise the bar once, and that's where it. Strong, no doubt about it, but Owen had fought stronger, And that was all it took. Raise the bar once, and that's where it lived forever on. His power was a brutish, simple one that paled in comparison to some of the more grandiose out there. But it was effective in seconds. The 5 robots were pieces in his wake, and the large mech was only a few feet away. There's one good thing about dealing with robots, though, especially ones as big as you. It's probably the only time I get to have a fight where I don't need to hold back, and I have. The 5 robots were pieces in his wake, and the large mech was only a few feet away. There's one good thing about dealing with robots, though, especially ones as big as you. It's probably the only time I get to have a fight where I don't need to hold back, and I have to say, from time to time, that is an absolute pleasure. The mech turned to. Time to time, that is an absolute pleasure. The mech turned to launch another pointless barrage of projectiles at him. But Owen was no longer there. He leapt into the air, turning the ground below him into utter rubble. As he soared upward, his course was the center of the mech's torso. But as he'd expected, it wasn't going to let him land so easily. One of the forearms swept through the air, intent on smacking Owen back to the ground. Instead, he grabbed on as it struck his fingers, bending the metal as he pulled himself up, getting into position just above torso. But as he'd expected, it wasn't going to let him land so easily. One of the forearms swept through the air, intent on smacking Owen back to the ground. Instead, he grabbed on as it struck his fingers, bending the metal as he pulled himself up, getting into position just above where the massive gun joined to its wrist. You big guys always seem tough, but beating you is just about knowing the simple trick. It's the same way you eat a whale, one bite at a time. You bastard. He reared back, spreading out his palm to get as wide a surface area as possible, then slammed his hand through the metal wrist. It took several more blows, but eventually the wrist. With a simple trick, it's the same way you eat a whale, one bite at a time. You bastard. He reared back, spreading out his palm to get as wide a surface area as possible, then slammed his hand through the metal wrist. It took several more blows, but eventually the wrist was so shattered that the entire gun broke away, smashing to the ground and flattening a few robots in the process. The entire gun broke away, smashing to the ground and flattening a few robots in the process. Owen looked up at the 6-eyed head. He was pretty sure at least a few of those orbs were gazing angrily at him. If the thing was pissed now, it would be livid. By the time he was finished, he began to climb up the remaining section of arm, slowly making his way closer to the torso. A loud whooshing sound ripped through the air, and suddenly Owen found himself and the arm he was holding in free fall. They crashed heavily onto the street, and before he could react, one of the 6 legs was above him and making his way closer to the torso. A loud whooshing sound ripped through the air, and suddenly Owen found himself and the arm he was holding in free fall. They crashed heavily onto the street, and before he could react, one of the 6 legs was above him and dropping fast, clearly intent on crushing him like a bug, detaching parts. Pretty clever, Owen admitted as he rolled out of the way, but you'll run out of arms eventually. The leg kept pace with his movements, and as he pushed off the ground, it slammed into his back, pinning him to the concrete below. Holy shit, are you okay? Gail's voice came through his calm, and even though he couldn't see where she was at the moment, she obviously had line of sight on him. Been better, Owen admitted, his voice it slammed into his back, pinning him to the concrete below. Holy shit, are you okay? Gail's voice came through his calm, and even though he couldn't see where she was at the moment, she obviously had line of sight on him. Been better, Owen admitted, his voice but strained. But I'm pretty sure the gravity thingy they put in these to make them light enough to function reduced its weight. Normally I'd expect this to be a lot worse. Normally one day we need to have a talk about what you consider normal. Gail said, can you get out? Not easily. I'm strong enough. Trained, but I'm pretty sure the gravity thingy they put in these to make them light enough to function reduced its weight. Normally I'd expect this to be a lot worse. Normally one day we need to have a talk about what you consider normal. Gail said, can you get out? Not easily. I'm strong enough to move, but with this much weight, if I try to shove off the ground, my arms will probably go right through it, especially given how much we've wrecked the street. Little help. Pretty sure I can hit, but with this much weight, if I try to shove off the ground, my arms will probably go right through it, especially given how much we've wrecked the street. Little help. Pretty sure I can hit it hard enough to knock it aside, but you'll need to scramble. Gail warned, even a second is plenty. I just have to flip over, then I can grab the damn leg and start tearing it apart. Yeah, I heard your whole one bite at a time spiel. Personally, if I had to kill a whale, I think I'd rather a harpoon to the heart. Even as she spoke, Owen Could hear the wind picking up around her. He mentally readied himself for the impending attack. Those arms are quick, they'll hurt. Yeah, I heard your whole one bite at a time spiel. Personally, if I had to kill a whale, I think I'd rather a harpoon to the heart. Even as she spoke, Owen could hear the wind picking up around her. He mentally readied himself for the impending attack. Those arms are quick, they'll knock me aside if I do a direct run. If I do a direct run, Owen told her in a hurricane. Winds blow so fast that pencils get embedded in trees. I'm pretty sure I can get you past a few waving arms. Now get ready, that leg is about to move. If you can do it, I'm in. Owen barely got the words out when a tremendous blast of wind her in a hurricane. Winds blow so fast that pencils get embedded in trees. I'm pretty sure I can get you past a few waving arms. Now get ready, that leg is about to move. If you can do it, I'm in. Owen barely got the words out when a tremendous blast of wind deafened him. It struck the leg at one of its joints and bent it outward. The pressure on Owen vanished. He pushed himself forward, getting on his feet before the leg could pin him again. He'd made it all of 10 steps before another struck the leg at one of its joints and bent it outward. The pressure on Owen vanished. He pushed himself forward, getting on his feet before the leg could pin him again. He'd made it all of 10 steps before another blast of wind hit him in the back, lifting him skyward at a rapidly increasing speed. Pretend you're doing a cannonball off the high dive, Gale instructed, yelling to be heard over the calms. Tuck everything in and prepare for impact. As of now, I'm Captain Ahab, except we're killing him skyward at a rapidly increasing speed. Pretend you're doing a cannonball off the high dive, Gale instructed, yelling to be heard over the calms. Tuck everything in and prepare for impact. As of now, I'm Captain Ahab, except we're killing our damned whale. It had been a long time since Owen was in a real fight picking off stray robots here, and there didn't exactly test his limits. And while the work with his team was rewarding, it usually demanded whale. It had been a long time since Owen was in a real fight picking off stray robots here, and there didn't exactly test his limits. And while the work with his team was rewarding, it usually demanded more effort to keep control than to push himself. The assessment with elemental fury was the nearest he'd come, and even that was closer to a dance than a brawl, since he had to evade and subdue without seriously injuring. He'd been so long outside of a true battle that he'd almost forgotten to push himself. The assessment with elemental fury was the nearest he'd come, and even that was closer to a dance than a brawl, since he had to evade and subdue without seriously injuring. He'd been so long outside of a true battle that he'd almost forgotten the thrill of danger and adrenaline that coursed through one's system. That familiar feeling came rushing back as he tore through the air, moving so fast that he couldn't even see the giant mech's arms. Danger and adrenaline that coursed through one's system. That familiar feeling came rushing back as he tore through the air, moving so fast that he couldn't even see the giant mech's arms. As it reached uselessly for him, Gale had built up too much speed for the thing to have a shot in hell. Owen roared past all its defenses and slammed directly into its chest. Were he human, or even less established in his career, Owen would have been a smear on the metal surface. Instead, he left too much speed for the thing to have a shot in hell. Owen roared past all its defenses and slammed directly into its chest. Were he human, or even less established in his career, Owen would have been a smear on the metal surface. Instead, he left a sizable dent and merely shook his head, more dizzy from the ride than hurt from the stop. Already, he could see the remaining arms reaching for him, so Owen didn't waste the time he had bending the and merely shook his head, more dizzy from the ride than hurt from the stop. Already, he could see the remaining arms reaching for him, so Owen didn't waste the time he had bending the metal under his fingers to get a solid grip. He reared back and punched directly into the dent he'd made. Unlike when fighting the robot's arm this time, he tried to concentrate the force as much as possible. His fist effortlessly broke through the armored barrier, grabbing both sides of the hole. He tore it wider and then directly into the dent he'd made. Unlike when fighting the robot's arm this time, he tried to concentrate the force as much as possible. His fist effortlessly broke through the armored barrier, grabbing both sides of the hole. He tore it wider and then stumbled through, only a few feet ahead of the metal appendages, trying to knock him away. Truthfully, he hadn't been entirely sure what to expect once he was inside robots. A few feet ahead of the metal appendages, trying to knock him away. Truthfully, he hadn't been entirely sure what to expect once he was inside robots. might be semi-regular occurrences in the hero world, but the giant type weren't exactly run-of-the-mill. Part of him expected the cavity within to be filled with the smaller bots operating the big mech, like some sort of weird puppet. Instead, it seemed like he'd just thrown himself into a gigantic car engine. All around him were motors, pistons, and wires so tightly bunched together that he could barely move without bumping into something operating the big mech, like some sort of weird puppet. Instead, it seemed like he'd just thrown himself into a gigantic car engine. All around him were motors, pistons, and wires so tightly bunched together that he could barely move without bumping into something. Owen was a little disappointed. Actually silly as it might have been, he would have loved to have seen the puppet theory in action on the upside. However, this made his job a whole lot easier. He didn't know how these things worked or what critical parts would take it down. So Owen was just going to break everything, which was much easier, especially when it was all neatly packed in like this, setting his sights on the nearest cluster. However, this made his job a whole lot easier. He didn't know how these things worked or what critical parts would take it down. So Owen was just going to break everything, which was much easier, especially when it was all neatly packed in like this, setting his sights on the nearest cluster of moving metal beams. Owen braced himself and threw a punch that he hoped would be just strong enough to send. Owen braced himself and threw a punch that he hoped would be just strong enough to send the heavier bits bouncing around inside the armored torso. No one was sure exactly what came bursting out of the mech's back like buckshot flying into the air before they could make out so much as a blurry detail, but the Pierce team had a pretty good idea of what had caused it. After all, witnessing Gale fling tight, no one was sure exactly what came bursting out of the mech's back like buckshot flying into the air before they could make out so much as a blurry detail, but the Pierce team had a pretty good idea of what had caused it. After all, witnessing Gale fling Titan into the giant robot's chest had significantly narrowed down the need for conjecture. Despite the large crater in its front and smoking holes in its back, the mech continued. Robot's chest had significantly narrowed down the need for conjecture. Despite the large crater in its front and smoking holes in its back, the mech continued, moving about seemingly unbothered by the hero currently tearing up its insides. More of the smaller bots were still pouring out, though they seemed to slow significantly. Whether it was running out of steam or keeping the bots inside to fight the intruder was anyone's guess, though the latter strategy seemed like it would be pretty inefficient. Just like the good old days, the voice came from the rooftops edge where a man wearing a familiar hero costume was climbing up from the fire escape. Seemed like it would be pretty inefficient. Just like the good old days, the voice came from the rooftops edge where a man wearing a familiar hero costume was climbing up from the fire escape. I mean, not the giant robot part. Tech wasn't quite as fancy as it is these days, so they never got them that big, but dropping Titan into the middle of a fray and letting him do his work. Now that takes me back. A pleasure to see you again, Topsy galvanized greeted him. What brings you to our rooftop? Heard Titan's people were in need of a little help, and seeing as I'm technically just supposed to be a coach anyway, it seemed like a good place for me to lend a hand, Topsy replied. Besides Titan again, Topsy galvanized greeted him. What brings you to our rooftop? Heard Titan's people were in need of a little help, and seeing as I'm technically just supposed to be a coach anyway, it seemed like a good place for me to lend a hand, Topsy replied. Besides Titan looked out for my team, least I could do is watch over his. Seems like it might have been unnecessary though. No, this is perfect. Bubble said you can go help him. Gale just threw him inside the mech without joining. Even for Titan, that has to be dangerous. If you hurry, you can bring that thing down before he gets hurt. The concern is touching but misplaced, Topsy assured her. Do you ever wonder why he's called Titan? From the battlefield nearby, a huge metal beam suddenly burst out of. Dangerous. If you hurry, you can bring that thing down before he gets hurt. The concern is touching but misplaced, Topsy assured her. Do you ever wonder why he's called Titan? From the battlefield nearby, a huge metal beam suddenly burst out of the mech's lower torso and was dragged upward like an inverted stabbing. The behemoth's legs began to shake, no longer capable of making the smooth, controlled motions that it had previously. Slightly higher, a blast of wind shattered another of its eyes, the third one taken out since Gale began her outer assault. Because he's really strong like Titans from Mythology Zone said. That's probably why Titan agreed to use the name, but I actually know the hero who suggested it to him, and that wasn't The reason Topsy paused to glance over the edge of the roof, taking in the shuddering robot with a dark smile. That fellow was Titan's rival back in their HCP days, and when they first started out he was much more powerful than our friend currently, killing a robot from the inside. But every time he lost, Titan kept coming back stronger and more determined. Fellow was Titan's rival back in their HCP days, and when they first started out he was much more powerful than our friend currently, killing a robot from the inside. But every time he lost, Titan kept coming back stronger and more determined than before. He just couldn't be stopped. Suddenly the mech's legs gave out. It came crashing to the ground, the weight of its body clearly. Just couldn't be stopped. Suddenly the mech's legs gave out. It came crashing to the ground, the weight of its body clearly. No longer being offset by a gravitational anomaly, the arms flailed now too heavy to move properly, and smoke poured out from the holes in its torso. "You can never really kill a Titan," Topsy said, nodding to the fallen monster that only moments ago had seemed so indomitable. "Even the gods could only imprison them. That's why the name was suggested, because if you've ever seen him in a real battle walking through torso, you can never really kill a Titan," Topsy said, nodding to the fallen monster that only moments ago had seemed so indomitable. "Even the gods could only imprison them. That's why the name was suggested, because if you've ever seen him in a real battle walking through blood and fire completely unstained, you understand what it is to witness something. Completely unstained, you understand what it is to witness something that's truly unstoppable. The man you've been working with all this time is a good fellow, but he isn't the real Titan. Titan is a destroyer, a force of nature, a monster that only the grace of God has put on our side." Topsy raised his hand and pointed to the collapsing mech. Flames began to rise out from the many openings hunched in the giant body around it. The smaller robots suddenly began to twitch, then collapse like puppets whose strings had been cut after one last outward explosion. From the place where the torso joined to the metal legs, a figure could be seen walking out from within the mechanical beast's belly. Even from so far away they could recognize the familiar red and blue costume as the man strolled, dirty and sooty, but unharmed, away from his fallen foe. That is the real Titan, and as an over-the-hill hero who's witnessed too much evil in his lifetime, I can't tell you how fucking ecstatic I am to see him again. The first thing Hexaline noticed as her dirty and sooty, but unharmed, away from his fallen foe. That is the real Titan, and as an over-the-hill hero who's witnessed too much evil in his lifetime, I can't tell you how fucking ecstatic I am to see him again. The first thing Hexaline noticed as her eyes fluttered open was the strange man wearing a red and white costume, with his fingers on her forehead. The second was Titan standing over the other man's shoulder and looking anxious. The third, a realization that quickly dwarfed the other two, was that she was lying in the paw/hand of a massive rabbit which was stooped over to allow Titan and the stranger access. Surprisingly, it wasn't panic that welled in her at the sight of the towerings. The third, a realization that quickly dwarfed the other two, was that she was lying in the paw/hand of a massive rabbit which was stooped over to allow Titan and the stranger access. Surprisingly, it wasn't panic that welled in her at the sight of the towering creature, but relief, like something long trapped had. Relief, like something long trapped had finally gotten free. "Is this Hopkules?" It nodded, a gigantic gesture that was impossible to miss, staring down at her with those black shiny eyes. He looked much the same as he had when she was a child, armored and human-like, but easy to cuddle. She wondered if he could still cast light from his mouth like he did when something in her room had made a noise. Staring down at her with those black shiny eyes, he looked much the same as he had when she was a child, armored and human-like, but easy to cuddle. She wondered if he could still cast light from his mouth like he did when something in her room had made a noise, and he lit it up to show her nothing was there. It was possible, though clearly things had changed. Slowly Hexaline pulled herself to lit it up to show her nothing was there. It was possible, though clearly things had changed. Slowly Hexaline pulled herself to reclined, lean, noticing for the first time Galvanized Zone and Bubble were also there, albeit standing farther back from the giant bunny. Next to her team stood Gale and an older hero that she half recognized as Titan's friend. Around them were dozens, if not hundreds, of the robots, all collapsed lifeless on the ground. There was also a fair amount of damage to the nearby buildings, some in the shape of giant rabbit-like footprints. "Ah, fuck me running. Am I going to be held liable for all This cause, if so you can go ahead and just kill my ass now. Good job, Bedrest Titan told the man in red and white. Looks like she's back to her usual cranky self. She should still take it easy for a while. Healing or not, that sort of damage takes a toll. I have to get going though, lots of our people need patching up. Bedrest walked away from the paw and hectic over to where a nondescript man in a rumpled suit was standing. Seconds later, they were gone, seemingly vanished into thin air. Okay, but seriously, how much of this is on me? Hexaline asked just before Titan wrapped her in a hug so tight that for a moment she worried Hopkules would have to intervene. You damn kids are gonna give me a heart attack, and I don't think I can even get those. Titans slowly set her down, at which moment the rest of the team swarmed her hard as she tried to seem unbothered by the attention. It was impossible not to be a little moved by the influx of warmth. Anyway, to answer your question, you're technically clear on all this, Titan told her. For one thing, it was self-defense, since Hopkules only attacked robots that came after it, not to mention the fact that you were unconscious. So you had no say in what was happening. I ran everything up the ladder while we waited for bedrest. And while there might be some hearings and paperwork, you'll come out fine. I'll make sure of it. Something about his voice made it clear that Titan meant those words, possibly by any means necessary. Hexaline had a good idea of just how many means the man had. As the others finally let go of her, she turned around to take in Hopkules in all his glory. When I summoned him as a kid, he was like 5 feet tall tops. Excellent, said you summoned him to drive off your fears, right? Bubble ventured. Well, you've seen a lot more since then. Maybe you've got much bigger fears. On the subject of your rabbit, I need to talk with you about something. Titan interrupted. We've learned that those giant robots are acting as relay points for the smaller ones. Basically kill the big guys, and the little ones go limp. Something in Hex's brain wriggled again. Why did that seem familiar? Unfortunately, just like with the little ones, once the big bots are damaged to a certain point, they self-destruct. Everything we might be able to use, signal relays included. Currently, the heroes have been able to take down 4 of the large mechs, and they're dealing with the 5th right now. Titan continued. The 6th will be a special case. However, we're going to try to infiltrate it, find the device that's receiving and relaying the master signal, and trace it back to the source. Brewster can't take another attack like this one. It needs to end today. So do you need me to summon Hopkules to clear space or something? Even as the words left her mouth, Hexaline hated the taste of and relaying the master signal and trace it back to the source. Brewster can't take another attack like this one. It needs to end today. So do you need me to summon Hopkules to clear space or something? Even as the words left her mouth, Hexaline hated the taste of them. She'd just been reunited with an old friend. The last thing she wanted was to send him away again. Actually, pretty much the exact opposite. Titan pointed up at the giant rabbit, who was still watching everything with those glassy eyes. Your summon is incredible, and right now it might be the most useful piece on the battlefield. If you're willing, we'd like to have you and Hopkules help contain the mech while a team hunts through its insides for the signal device. If the robot is fighting something of equal strength, that will keep it from tearing up the city, which will minimize damage and casualties while we take the time to search. It's dangerous work, though I won't lie to you about that. I understand if you don't want to take the risk, especially so soon after a close call. Risk comes with the turf of being a peer's. Excellent replied, but you're sort of skipping over a big detail, aren't you? Self-defense is one thing. What you're describing sounds a lot more like picking a fight, and that's hero work. Giant bunny. Or no, I'm not a hero, remember? No, you're not. Titan agreed, but this work is messy, and it's far from the first time that a super who had what we needed wasn't wearing a mask. The DVA has protocol for this kind of situation, and with Brewster's predicament, you weren't hard to sell them on. The technical term is temporarily authorized hero asset, and it means you can fight the good fight until the current threat is neutralized. And if I screw up, Hexaline had seen what happened to heroes who made serious mistakes. The DBA wasn't shy about letting the public watch the trials. It was important to show that these enhanced beings charged with people's safety were held accountable. That was part of why people were comfortable trusting heroes. Then that's on me as the one that authorized you. Titan set a hand on her shoulder, his massive palm almost engulfing her whole upper arm. But you won't screw up if you decide to fight. I know you're going to kick that thing's ass. And what makes you so certain? Excellent, shot back, wishing she had as much confidence as he did. Because I Know you because I've seen you work, and because the first time we trained together your immediate instinct was to try and show up me a hero renowned for his strength. Titan smiled down at her. Half of this job is just having the guts to wade into dangerous, impossible situations and try to fight them back to salvageable. Guts are something. You've got a lot of guts. And a giant fire-breathing rabbit. He breathes fire now. Excellent glanced up at Hopkules as if expecting an explanation, but only received the same endless stare looking back at her. Shit. She'd never given him eyelids, had she? Oh good, that's news for you too. We were wondering how that bunny didn't burn your house down. Zone said he can do a hell of a lot, and so can you, but only if you want. A Titan dug into his pockets and pulled out a small silver device. This was dropped off along with your healer. It will connect you with all the other heroes out there trying to save this city. Take it, and until that last mech is beaten, you're one of us. Excellent reached out her fingers with their chipped black nail polish wrapping around the device and carefully lifting it from Titan's hand. The dream she'd had as a child, the one she'd pissed away with years of bad decisions, seemed to glow in the gizmo's metallic depths. She was never going to be a real hero, and she'd made peace with that a long time ago. But if she couldn't grab hold of her dream, she would still settle for grazing her fingers against it. Tell me how this thing works, Titan. It sounds like we've got some robot ass to kick. Excellent scream was drowned out by the thunderous boom of Hopkules landing on the street below and launching himself upward once more, leaving only a giant footprint behind. She stood nestled between his neck and shoulder while Titan and the rest of her team clung to the top of Hopkules' armor a few feet away. Her words seemed to sum up everyone's sentiment. There was no carnival ride in the world that could simulate riding on the shoulders of a giant rabbit as it hopped through town with no teleporter on hand capable of moving a 20-story bunny. There was only one way to get to the final mech's location. Several heroes had already evacuated a path. Others were driving the mech toward them in an effort to minimize how much damage was done. Word came down from dispatch, the strange woman relaying everything through the new comm Excellent had shoved in her ear, that they were converging on a spot that had already been halfway leveled, fighting an earlier mech. Better to rebuild one section of town than to nearby. Gale and Topsy floated alongside Hopkules, her powers keeping the two of them aloft, though they'd been offered the chance to ride on the rabbit's shoulder. The two heroes had declined. Hexelton wasn't sure if it was out of pride or prudence, and she didn't really care. They were free to miss out. All the more room for her and her team. Hexelton, you've reached the rendezvous point. Dispatch's voice brought her back to reality. She looked down and noticed a cluster of brightly colored costumes dotting the ground, the heroes that were waiting for them. For her, there was a moment as Hexant began to rise from Hopkules' shoulder that she genuinely thought it was her joy lifting her up. Then she felt the swirling wind and realized that it was Gale transporting her team to the ground. Even as she was losing altitude, Hexlant could see the mech, which was only a few blocks away. It was moving slowly and steadily as the other heroes drove it toward her. She wasn't sure if it had noticed Hopkules or not, but as soon as she got the order, she'd make sure it couldn't pay attention to anything else. You know, I have seen some crazy shit in my days, really truly insane stuff, and this doesn't take the cake, but it's still pretty impressive. The man speaking had his head tilted back as he took in Hopkules. Of all the people waiting for her, he looked the least like a hero wearing a simple outfit that was mostly notable for the large array of pockets. Eventually he turned from the bunny to the woman who summoned it, making his way over to Hexelent and taking her hand. Pleasure to meet you, Hexelent. I'm Jeremir, and yes, that's my hero name. You probably recognize most of the group from the news, but I keep a lower profile. Jeremir was right. As a Brewster resident, Hexelent was quite familiar with Eder and Deadlift, to say nothing of Birdsman Spring, Granite, and Misdirection. The rest of Elemental Fury. There were other heroes as well, ones she'd seen on the news in other towns, heroes who didn't call Brewster home. As she scanned them, another face caught her eye, one that lacked a mask yet was familiar. All the same, isn't that the fucking disintegration guy? Why isn't he in jail? I have a name, the man muttered. He was wearing a white jumpsuit, standard issue to mark supers in prison, and rubbing his wrists where handcuff marks could still be seen. It's Eli, and I'm here for the same reason you are. You can summon a giant fire-breathing rabbit. Hexelent asked. He's here, Because he's got a talent we need, Titan explained, cutting off the conversation before it spiraled into a barrage of insults. Jeremiah had him pulled out of jail to lend a hand in exchange for a reduced sentence. The armor on these mechs is tough and Eli can get people in without having to punch through it, but you can punch through it, Hexcellent pointed out. Given the size of these things, having just one hero search for the signal relay would take too long. As Jeremiah spoke, he began pulling what looked like cell phones with extra wires attached from his pockets and handing them to the various heroes. One of my teammates whipped these up in the last hour. Hopefully, they'll be able to find the device that's receiving the master signal. We're going to split up and cover as much ground inside the thing as possible, Ether, and I will be paired up, so if anyone gets a hit on their detector, contact us, and I'll head over to jam in the tracking device. Jeremiah paused in front of Titan, only a few of the boxes left in his hands. Since we don't want to do so much damage inside that the mech melts down, I'd prefer to have our more destructive members help the rabbit keep it busy. You okay with taking distraction duty? I was going to demand it, Titan replied. No way in hell I'm leaving Hexaline on her own. This is pretty fucking far from being on my own, she said, jerking a thumb at the bunny whose shadow was looming over all of them. Still, these big ones are tough. I'm watching your back, so make peace with it. Titan really fits in better in the line of fire anyway, Jeremiah seconded. And hey, at least it will make for good footage. He nodded to a nearby rooftop where a news crew could just be made out pointing their cameras over the side. Now that she was looking, Hexaline caught sight of another crew a block away and a few more a street over from them. Wow, that is ballsy. Excellent, said Jeremiah, clucked his tongue. Not every super goes into our line of work. They probably all got a way to protect themselves or vanish if the need arises. Even if they don't, I'm not turning them away. After all this destruction, we'll need some good footage of the heroes fighting back the threat. And one corporeal Bubble's voice wasn't particularly loud, but it still managed to catch the attention of everyone nearby. The term is privately employed emergency response. Super Gale corrected. Goddamn right it is, Titan agreed, and we are thankful to have her. But time is running short. Jeremiah finished doling out the boxes and turned to address everyone, effortlessly commanding their attention. Part of Hexcellent wondered how she'd never heard of him before. Between the good looks and leadership skills, it seemed like Jeremiah would have a bit of notoriety. When the mech arrives, everyone is either on hunting or containment duty. He continued, you know your team by whether or not there's a jerry-rigged phone in your hand. Gale, we need you to use Eli to erode the armor before coming in to join us, so that there are plenty of easy entrances. Everyone else get in, skin the equipment, and pray those damn things work. Those of you on the outside, contain the damage as much as possible, but try not to break the mech to bad. Remember, we're going to be inside the thing, not to mention that if you bust it beyond a certain point, everything useful inside will self-destruct, signal relay included. Also watch out for the smaller bots. They're sticking near it, and we can't shut them down until we trace the signal. Other than that, have fun and maybe try to put on a good show. The cameras are watching. Did he just actually tell us to have fun? Hexaline tried to keep her voice at a whisper only Titan and her team could hear, but from the snickers of a few nearby heroes it seemed to have carried farther than intended. Jeremiah is trying to keep the mood light. Going into battle tense doesn't help anyone, Titan told her. Now let's have Gale get you back on the bunny. Before the mech arrives, people are going to be counting on you to guide Hopculus and buy time for the heroes to do their work. All well, news cameras watch on, ready to judge every mistake I make. But no pressure, right? Look at the upside, Titan said. If we make it through this, that rabbit is marketable as hell. You'll have Hopkyle's plushies in stores by Christmas. As an agent and friend to a wide variety of heroes, Lenny could have pulled any number of strings to be among the first people to be evacuated from Brewster. He hadn't bothered contacting any of his active heroes though, and instead called in a quick favor from a retired former client. The ones on duty had better things to do than worry about him. A quick teleport later, and he was in his mountain home, a place he'd bought in hopes of spending time away from the job, focusing just on himself in the seclusion of nature. The widescreen television above the gas fireplace, wired up to a complete satellite package, betrayed his failure in disconnecting from the world. In fact, Lenny barely got any use from his cabin unless something threatened the town he was in, and he needed a quick place to lie low. Sometimes he loaned it out to clients, that needed to hide out from the press for a while as well. It was spacious enough to house 4 comfortably, or 6 in a pinch, and despite his intention of roughing it, Lenny had stocked the place with cushy furniture and high-end electronics, to say nothing of the booze. In a way, the cabin had served its purpose, though he'd bought it for soul-searching, and what he'd uncovered was that he was not a man who wanted to disconnect from the job. He was the job, and he was happiest when he was knee-deep in it. At the moment, he was juggling to phone calls, a half-dozen news streams on his laptop, and a live television feed of the fight. In Brewster, the footage was grainy and far off, which was a damn shame. Otherwise, something like this would easily make the national reels for a week minimum. Still, it was close enough that he could just make out the big robot being pushed through town, drawing nearer to another massive form. With each step, the angle was shit. A skyscraper he didn't remember seeing before was blocking out everything save for the tips of a pair of ears. But Lenny was plugged in. He knew what was lurking behind the building, as well as how many of his clients were about to go take the last mech bastard on. Yeah, you heard me. Lenny snapped, his energy much higher than the weary clerk on the phone. 10,000 of the old Titan shirts. Well then, update the damn material, but keep the look as vintage as possible. Trust me, you're gonna wanna get ahead of this one. A new figure appeared on screen just as the mech cleared the last row of buildings and approached the waiting ambush. It was huge by most scales, though compared to the robot it looked like a normal-sized bird. Lenny hadn't seen that one in quite a while. The screen shook as the news crew started moving, getting closer than was safe or prudent to the ensuing battle. Lenny hoped they stayed cautious, but he also hoped they didn't turn back. This was going to be solid gold. Go ahead and make sure all the Birdman merch is stocked up as well, especially his bird plushies. Looks like he's going to be getting some screen time. To told you I had one more. Birdsman yelled the Barbet Titan from atop his final summon, a stone-colored bird with at least a 25-foot wingspan. The creature looked like a statue come to life, with every flap rubble flew from its wings. Despite appearing as though it weighed somewhere in the ton region, it effortlessly climbed higher into the sky, moving closer to the mech. The robot turned to face the bird, giving Gale and Eli the chance to start disintegrating holes in its hull. Range distraction team, we are go get in there and draw fire. Jaramir's voice echoed through the area. He barely even needed the comms to give orders. All of our melee people, and this includes Hexlin and Hopkules, you hold back until we're inside. We don't need to dodge your bunny while trying to break in. Yeah, about that. Why isn't it already attacking us? Hexaline asked, her voice nervous but determined, seeing as she was currently standing on Hopkules' shoulder, braced for whatever attack the mech might throw. It was a fair and relevant question. This is misdirection. I was told to keep you hidden until it was showtime. The illusion-wielding hero walked over from the group to stand near Titan and Hopkules. We thought it might attack something as big as you, and like Jaramir said, that could be problematic while the heroes are breaking in. Plus, this gives you the element of surprise. How in the hell did you hide something this big? Hexlin asked, beating Titan to the question by only a few seconds. I'm not on a team like Elemental Fury for nothing, Misdirection replied. I conjured a fake skyscraper around you, around most of us actually. As far as anyone more than 50 feet away can tell, this is just a building. Should let us keep the mech from knowing how much we're working with. There was a crunch from behind and Titan turned to find Granite standing nearby, several feet farther away, and he caught a glimpse of Galvanize, who was jogging over. Our illusionist is top-notch, Granite said with her we never have to tip our hand on the battlefield, Mr. Granite. Galvanized said, breaking in. Spring told me that you were looking. Just Granite, and heck yeah, I was looking for you. Heard you've been going around juicing everyone up. Thought I might get in on that. I mean, I'm strong. But Granite nodded to the mech, which was currently being peppered with disintegration holes along with energy blasts from other heroes, while a dozen costumed figures raced to slip inside its torso. That thing is probably stronger. I don't actually make you stronger though, Galvanize explained. I just bring you to the best you can possibly be. Still better than nothing, Granite said. I have to be on top of my game, otherwise Birdman and Rocksteady are going to get all the attention. He named that thing Rocksteady, Titan asked, momentarily dumbfounded. ROC, like the giant mythical bird. Also, it's a pun since it's stone, and no, none of us has any idea how it can fly. Granite finished the explanation and looked At Galvanize, who simply took a step closer to the shifter currently composed of rocks and did what he'd been asked. Do your best. Granite stiffened at the words, then stretched his limbs carefully, testing their movements, with the boost surging through. Then not bad at all. I can tell I haven't broken any barriers, but I feel good, like I'm on top of my game. Titan, you getting in on this? 80% of the heroes have infiltrated the mech's torso, Dispatch said quietly, speaking in their ears. Melee. Distraction team, be ready. You'll be called as soon as the percentage passes 95. Titan prefers to reach his pinnacle without help, Galvanize replied, unaware of the orders being issued across the comms. Well, in rescue work, suddenly using more strength than I'd planned could be dangerous. Titan replied, I need near perfect control in those delicate situations. He looked at the stomping mech and then at Hexcellent all the way up at the top of her rabbit's shoulder. As he turned, he also caught sight of a small group of reporters getting in for a closer view. Well, that would make Lenny happy at least. But you know, seeing as I'm playing defense today anyway, a little extra pep in the step might not be such a bad idea. Really, it was one of the few times Titan had seen Galvanize truly taken aback, even his composed smile faltering with uncertainty. Are you sure? I mean, you don't actually need my boost. You're plenty strong enough as it is, no doubt about it. Titan took Galvanize by the shoulder and pointed to where the camera crew was setting up. They didn't know it, but when misdirection's illusions dropped, those reporters would be in for a hell of a view. However, there is one thing we can all agree on, be we heroes or peers. Sometimes you have to give the people what they want. 95% mark cleared, Dispatch said. Misdirection dropped the illusion. We now want all attention on the melee. Distraction team. The air around the waiting heroes shimmered like pavement on a summer afternoon. When the spectacle ended, the mech's eyes turned toward them. There were audible gasps from the nearby reporters as a giant armor-wearing rabbit suddenly came into view. That's our cute Titan said. Then by all means, Titan, do your best. Galvanize turned toward the giant rabbit as its legs tensed, ready to launch itself forward. You to Hopkules. Titan's whole body tingled like he'd gotten an unexpected rush of adrenaline. Carefully, he shifted his weight, noting the way the concrete cracked and splintered under him. In almost any other circumstance, this would be dangerous, but facing off against a giant metal monster was one of the few times he didn't mind having a little extra gas in the tank. If nothing else, it would be interesting to see just what his metaphorical top speed was nowadays. It had been a long time since he needed to find out. Thanks, Titan said, moving with extra caution as he stepped forward. Now stay by Topsy. This whole area is about to become a war zone. With that, Titan leapt forward, only to be passed by Hopkules a few seconds later. Whatever programming the mech had been built with, whatever counter strategies designed around the data compiled from previous robot hero battles, it had most definitely not been given a ready response for being attacked by a 20-story tall rabbit. Hopkile's first punch caught it completely by surprise, leaving a massive dent in its six-sided head. The bunny followed up with a sucker punch to the torso. The echo from the second blow rang through the street. Hexcellent immediately heard Jaramir's voice snap in her ear. Avoid the body blows if possible. It's already tough enough to move around inside this thing without getting shaken like a martini. Don't mind Jaramir, he's just mad because you made him fall and look undignified. Eder added, her tone much less annoyed. But do please focus on the extremities. Those are going to do the most damage to the surrounding areas. Not a problem. Hexcellent tightened her grip on the bunny's fur and yelled up to its ear, grab an arm and snap that shit off. Luckily enough, an arm fitted with what looked like a half-dozen machine guns came toward them, no doubt intent on filling the attacking rabbit with countless holes before it could take aim. Hopkules grabbed the wrist area just below the guns and slammed another hand into the upper arm, straining the elbow joint. Since the damn mech didn't have a back, there was nowhere to twist to, so Hopkules just kept piling on more pressure, trying to make the joint snap. I'm going to take a wild guess that Hopkules was formed during a time when you watched a lot of wrestling. Titan sounded surprisingly calm, given that he was darting around on the other side of the mech, throwing punches into its legs as he tried to cripple the thing's mobility. Hexcellent could already see a tilt in the giant robot's stance, meaning at least one of its legs was now shorter than the others. I may or may not have enjoyed the occasional cage match in my childhood. Excellent heard the crunch and pop before she actually saw Hopkules pull away the front part of the arm. Her moment of triumph at seeing the threat neutralized was short-lived, however, as a blow from behind sent Hopkins stumbling forward. Only his gigantic feet saved him from losing his balance, entirely whirling around. Hexcellent quickly put together what had happened. While they were trying to take care of one arm, the bot had swung another around and fired a laser blast into Hopkins. Hexen scrambled across the shoulder to look down at her summons back and assess the damage. A huge part of his armor was eroded, and there were singe marks along the skin with burned-off patches of fur. Hopkins didn't seem to have slowed down, but he had to be hurting. Don't worry, buddy, we'll pay him back for that. Even Hexcellent was surprised at the fury kindled inside her. Just the sight of her old friend in pain was enough to make her want to turn that fucking mech to bits so thin it could be mistaken for glitter, but she couldn't, because then it would win. So they just have to settle for taking away its limbs. Hopkins swung back around to face its foe, and to excellent surprise, the mech stepped back slightly. It had seen that the bunny had the upper hand in a melee fight, so now it was trying to keep distance between them. The damn thing was learning, because of course it was. That was what these bastards did every time, every iteration. They just came back stronger and more organized, with no actual goal aside from collecting resources and tighten and dispatch. And whoever else is listening, I figured it out. Hexadecimal couldn't believe it had taken her this long to see what was happening, though to be fair, RTS had always been one of her least favorite genres to play. I know what the robot's motives are. We're all ears. The voice was Jaramir's. Excellent was relatively certain she also heard some explosions in the background. It's a video game. Hexaline had to pause as Hopkins leapt out of the way to avoid another laser blast. While working to close the gap, the mech kept sliding back, trying to line up its next shot, while also dealing with the smaller yet potent threats on the ground. Going to need some elaboration, Titan said. All of this, the mech, the robots, the motives. It's a real-time strategy game. You make troops, then send them out to fight and get resources. You use the experience from those encounters to make more bigger troops, and repeat the process over and over until you can wipe out the enemy. That's why no one could figure out what the fuck these things wanted. This is what they want, these fights. Why in the hell would someone go to all this trouble just to play a game? Gale snapped. No idea, but it's the first theory I've heard that actually fits the pattern. Jaramir replied, though if anything it drives home how much we need to make this work. An attack more powerful than this one, and the city will be leveled. Distraction team, keep it up. We've got a potential match for the signal relay. I'm en route to confirm. Okay, no more slacking. Excellent yelled up to Hopkins. We've got one arm, 3 to go. You ready? In response, Hopkins leapt forward, barely avoiding the last volley of laser blasts. Fire breath was out, since it would melt the people inside the torso as much as the mech, but there was still good old-fashioned grappling. Hopkins slid its giant foot beneath the mech's legs, knocking 3 of the remaining 4 upward. At the same time, he grabbed onto the laser gun that had been taking shots at him with both hand-like paws and jerked upward, trying to use the weight of the falling mech to force a separation. At the shoulder, the idea was a good one, but it failed to account for one important element. After only a few feet, the mech's fall stopped cold. It righted itself, spinning another arm around to slam the back of Hopkins' knees, this time successfully sending it to the ground. While Hexcellent couldn't understand how something that big could stop itself with one leg, Titan knew all too well what had happened as he watched the rabbit fall. Those damn gravity disorders, the ones that made the mechs viable in the first place. It had changed its weight to save itself. Hopkins struggled to get up while Hexcellent did all she could to hang on, but they were no match for the mech's inhuman reaction time. The laser arm whipped around, pressing directly into Hopkins' head between the ears and the eyes. At this range, there was no chance the mech was going to miss. Instance. That was what it always seemed to come down to. All the planning, all the training, all the endless hours trying to imagine how one would deal with a situation. And the truth was that most fights and losses were determined in a span of less than a half second. That was the hardest thing to try and teach potential heroes, that in the dire moments they'd be leaning on their instincts. That was why the HCP was so tough on them. When those moments arrived, their reactions had damn sure better be the right ones, or people would die. Titan wasn't perfect. He had a list of names that proved that fact beyond all debate. But he'd been doing the job for a long time, and even if he'd been off for a while, some things never quite faded in that moment as the mech swung its laser cannon towards Hopkules's head, with Hexlin so close there was no way she wouldn't be caught in the blast. He moved without hesitation, because there was no time for such a luxury. He was betting everything on the fact that the mech hadn't changed its weight back from where it stopped its fall. If it could stop itself on one leg, then maybe it could be moved by the same appendage. It was still a roll of the dice one, where Snake Eyes meant Excellent would die. If it came to that, she wouldn't go alone. The least Titan could and would do was make sure whoever made these mechanical monsters was sent to join her. Everybody hold on, Titan roared into the comms as he wrapped his arms around the bottom of the mech's nearest leg. No time to try and drag, it could still get off a shot he needed to completely disorient the damn thing, slamming his legs through the concrete for stability. Titan's arms crushed into the metal of the leg, creating an unbreakable grip. With all he had, he jerked upwards into the side away from Hexlent. It was ridiculous. It was a flea trying to move a rhino, but it was all he had. He was a strong man. This was the only thing he could do, but by the gods, he could do it like no one else. The robot rose from its position atop Hopkules, caught by surprise and unable to react to going suddenly airborne. In the span of seconds, it realized what was happening, and Titan felt the metallic beast began to grow rapidly heavier in his arms. None of that mattered though, because the real work was already done. Hopkules quickly rolled to the side and sprang back to its oversized feet. He looked unshaken, as near as Titan could tell by reading those glassy black eyes, and no worse for the wear. Holy shit, kind of thought we were goners there. Unlike her, Bunny Hexens was clearly rattled, and Titan couldn't blame her for that. For someone with no real combat training, she was holding together better than a lot of others would. What kind of legendary hero would I be if I let some asshole machine hurt my teammate? Titan released his grip on the leg, which came crashing down a few feet away. He wondered if the mech was debating stomping on him, though it had to have realized what little good that would do. Clearly not the kind who can manage to keep things smooth. For those inside, Jeremiah grumbled mercifully, we think we found the signal relay. If you can hold out for a few more minutes, I need to get the tracker inserted and let my team do their work. Put a little pep in your step. The bunny almost got taken out. Titan replied, yeah, Birdsman, you're the veteran summoner here. Have any of yours ever changed? Hexlence's voice had gone from scared to confused, and it took only a quick glance at Hopkules for Titan to understand why the giant rabbit was shifting before their very eyes. Long serrated claws slipping out of his hands, and new spiky armor growing out of the old. From behind, a vast pair of bat-like wings sprouted. The wings flapped once, sending a breeze across the entire area. No, I cannot say I've ever seen anything quite like that before, Birdsman replied from atop his flying stone rock. Trust me, that's the sort of thing that would stick in my memories and my nightmares. From above, Titan the mech took another shot with its lasers, and this time Hopkules didn't dodge. It took the blow right on its chest. The new armor burned, but refused to give way. In one shift, the tables had turned, and the weaker warrior had grown strong. For the first time, Titan had a feeling of what it must be like for others to fight him. I'm no expert, but I'm going to toss out a theory, Titan said, yanking his feet free from the concrete and making a run for the leg already dented with his handprints. Crippling mobility was the best way he could help now. The rest was going to be up to Jeremiah and Hexlent. Hopkules was supposed to keep you safe, right? You made him to fight your fears. That's how I remember it. But I was a kid, Excellent replied. Like I said, this is just a guess. If we assume that's how it went down though, then maybe Hopulus is still doing that. He came out so big because you were facing an overwhelming force. Then, when you almost died a few seconds ago, you got scared again, so he grew stronger. Can summons do that? Hexlent asked. Every super is different, so it's possible, Titan reminded her. There have been cases of summons with alteration capabilities under certain situations. Dispatch was calm, which Titan imagined was only possible because she hadn't just watched a 20-story rabbit shapeshift. However, none that we know of were on quite so grand a scale. As someone who has to listen to this without knowing what the hell is going on, rabbit shapeshift. However, none that we know of were on quite so grand a scale. As someone who has to listen to this without knowing what the hell is going on, may I just request that someone take pictures? Jeremiah Asked because it sounds absolutely fascinating. Let's just say that after I lifted the whole mech, Hexant upstaged me. Titan grabbed the same leg once again, this time digging his hands in and climbing up toward the knee. I lifted the whole mech, Hexant upstaged me. Titan grabbed the same leg once again, this time digging his hands in and climbing up toward the knee joint. The lasers from the mech's underside fired at him, but this did little more than singe his clothes. He really needed to ask for a raise. The suit costs were piling up. Oh, you wanna complain? I just went from being a top-level summoner to some asshole on a bird. Bird's man added, at least you got to do something cool. I'm flying around dodging shots. You know, this isn't quite what I pictured the conversations of heroes to be like. Excellent. Admitted we only sound like this when we're winning, Jeremiah assured her. At least you got to do something cool. I'm flying around dodging shots. You know, this isn't quite what I pictured the conversations of heroes to be like. Excellent. Admitted we only sound like this when we're winning, Jeremiah assured her. Which, by the way, we are. The tracker is implanted, and my team is tracing the signal. Everyone inside the mech evacuate as soon as I get confirmation that we've found the location. Ether and I will be out of here. To think you and your upgraded rabbit can handle things from there. Titan smashed his hand through the knee joint, causing the mech to wobble as it fired wave after wave of laser. Rabbit can handle things from there. Titan smashed his hand through the knee joint, causing the mech to wobble as it fired wave after wave of lasers and bullets at the heroes, keeping it distracted. When the machine tipped, he got a clear view to the other side where Hopkules was flexing his claws and testing his wings. Excellence words crackled over the comms. A moment later, all traces of fear gone from her voice. You're damn right. We can. Nobody puts my bunny back in the box. Evacuation at 80%. Dispatches reports were helpful from her voice. You're damn right. We can. Nobody puts my bunny back in the box. Evacuation at 80%. Dispatches reports were helpful, but it was visibly obvious that the mech wasn't clear, yet colorful costumed forms could be seen leaping from the holes in its body, some breaking into flight, while others vanished in midair or landed heavily on. The mech wasn't clear, yet colorful costumed forms could be seen leaping from the holes in its body, some breaking into flight, while others vanished in midair or landed heavily on the ground. Hexalyn stood on her rabbit's shoulder, waiting for the cue to strike as Hopkules dodged the occasional blast. The distraction team had done a great job. The damage to the surrounding area was almost minimal, and the smaller robots were being picked off or contained. Had done a great job. The damage to the surrounding area was almost minimal, and the smaller robots were being picked off or contained by the other heroes. It was hard to call anything in a day like this a win, but knowing how much worse things could have been, Excellent felt proud about what they'd accomplished. That pride was all the more magnified knowing that she'd been able to help. It was almost over. It had only been a taste of the life in the first place. Just one last course to go. And magnified knowing that she'd been able to help. It was almost over. It had only been a taste of the life in the first place. Just one last course to go. And she was determined to enjoy it. While Hexalyn didn't lick her lips in anticipation, it took effort. Part of her wanted to be sad at the ending and sighed at wondering when she would ever be able to summon her oldest friend again. But she pushed those thoughts away. There would be a lifetime of worry and more. Her wanted to be sad at the ending and sighed at wondering when she would ever be able to summon her oldest friend again. But she pushed those thoughts away. There would be a lifetime of worry and mourning for lost chances when the day was won. Until then, she still had a job to do for at least the next few minutes. She was a hero. She was damn sure going to act like it. Evacuation at 90% dispatch said the last of them should be out in the next 30 seconds. Jeremiah damn sure going to act like it. Evacuation at 90% dispatch said the last of them should be out in the next 30 seconds. Jeremiah reported from within the beast. As soon as they're clear, you need to take this thing apart. I'm not sure if the central system has a way to tell if it's being tracked, but at this point we'd be idiots to assume otherwise. We have to scrap this tin can and then I'm not sure if the central system has a way to tell if it's being tracked, but at this point we'd be idiots to assume otherwise. We have to scrap this tin can and then book it to the signal source before it has a chance to run. We've got teleporters on standby to get us close, and I'm ready to haul the team if it's a place they've never been. Gale told him. Evacuation complete save for Eder and Jeremiah. Dispatch announced also modus operandi has confirmed that the signal has been trailed. Told him evacuation complete save for Eder and Jeremiah Dispatch announced also modus operandi has confirmed that the signal has been traced to a location approximately 30 miles northeast of Brewster. Then that means we are out of here, Jeremiah exclaimed. Seconds later, Hexaline saw him and Eder drop from the middle of the mech's base, lasers passing through them ineffectually as they headed toward the ground. Excellent, you are clear for full engagement, Dispatch said. There are 0 known civilians in the area, so please emphasize expediency over caution. Dispatch, that was an order you really didn't have to bother giving her. Known civilians in the area, so please emphasize expediency over caution. Dispatch, that was an order you really didn't have to bother giving her. Titan chuckled. But good luck. Excellent, everyone will be down here helping out, so tear it apart. We'll do our best. She stared at the mech, fending off so many other heroes that it didn't even have time to worry about the giant rabbits standing on the sidelines. Maybe it thought they'd been scared away by almost getting shot in the head. Well, they had been scared, but it sure as shit wasn't away. Round 2, motherfucker. Hopkins barreled forward, and as it did, the costumed warriors parted to let it pass, already waiting for the impending charge. The newly grown claws hit first, stabbing into the mech's armored torso with some difficulty. It was a sturdy bastard. Excellent had to admit that much, but the holes Eli disintegrated had weakened the structural integrity by a fair bit. Hopkins jerked upward and managed to shred through a chunk of the torso, exposing the gears and circuitry within an arm. Came whirling around, ready to try and put a hole in the mech's attacker, but this time she and Hopkins were ready for it. Twisting his head, came whirling around, ready to try and put a hole in the mech's attacker, but this time she and Hopkins were ready for it. Twisting his head, Hopkins opened his mouth wide and bit down on the metal appendage with his mighty buck teeth before the mech could struggle free. The smell of melting metal lit the air as Hopkins finally was able to put his fire breath to use. Half of the arm clattered to the concrete, torn off by the combination of heat and strong jaws. The mech tried to retreat, but Hopkins wasn't. Half of the arm clattered to the concrete, torn off by the combination of heat and strong jaws. The mech tried to retreat, but Hopkins wasn't having any of that. Using the claws embedded in its torso, the giant rabbit lifted the mech upward until it was horizontal in the sky. Its arms whipped about, trying to line up a shot, while the remaining legs kicked about futilely. Still excellent. It was horizontal in the sky. Its arms whipped about, trying to line up a shot, while the remaining legs kicked about futilely. Still excellent. Waited to give the order. If she wanted this to work, they had to wait for the perfect moment. For a long, beautiful instant, the mech hung there, suspended by Hopkins's powerful arms. Then at last she saw it start to slide down the rabbit's claws. At the same time, she felt his shoulders begin to shake. The mech was turning up its weight again, trying to make them let go. She almost felt sorry for the mechanical monster. If only it had worked in a few wrestling games instead of all RTS, it might have seen what she was going for. Time for the backbreaker, bitchbot. Excellent yelled, and on cue Hopkins slammed the mech downward, not to the ground where it would have cracked and dented, but perhaps still survived, but directly on top of the rabbit's planted knee, where an armored spike happened to be pointing up to the sky. The mech came slamming down, one clawed paw on either side of the knee, pushing with all their might. If it had still been lighter, it might have endured. However, turning up, the weight of its body cut both ways. The mech cracked in half, its weakened torso unable to withstand the combination of weight and muscle that split it down the center of its chest. As soon as its pieces hit the ground, the other heroes were ready, smashing through the remains or turning them to scraps from afar. With ranged powers, no one was taking any chances of this thing getting back up. Hopkins even stomped on the remaining legs, turning them into little more than gleaming silver shards. You know, there are a lot of things I don't like about this job. Moments like this are not among them, Jeremiah commented. No shit, I need a cigarette after watching that. Eder added, you did good. Excellent. Titan told her, a hell of a job. Now we've got to go make the most of what you did and finish things off. Are you going to be okay on your own from here? Hexalyn stood atop her giant rabbit summon and looked down at the smoldering wreckage of a monster that she bested yet who hours ago had seemed completely unstoppable. I'll be fine, Titan. I just killed a giant robot right now. I am outright fantastic. From her perch so high up, it was hard to make out Titan as he grouped up with the others, but Hexalyn was almost positive she caught sight of a smile on his face. Just before his voice came through the calms, "You're damn right. You are 117 northeast of Brewster," was a whole lot of nothing, at least as far as Titan was concerned. Some folks enjoyed the loping hills and quasi mountains, good for hiking and camping, and not much else. Despite his rough and tumble appearance, though, Owen Daniels had always preferred life in a city to the more outdoorsy world. Visiting his wife's family in the South had been his only real exposure to the country, and when he'd fled to start his bar, he'd at least picked a place somewhere near civilization. Their enemy's location didn't surprise him or any of the others. An operation of such vast size, the base had to be hidden out in nowhere, otherwise they'd have found it and put this whole thing to bed ages ago. "This is the closest point I had relocated," informed them a teleporter who worked out of Port Valens. He had luckily done an internship in Brewster and had been able to see much of the town. There was no reason for him to have gone so far out in the boonies, though even a teleporter's encouragement to travel had limits. A few freelance teleporters had been nearby, but they weren't likely to get the team any closer. Besides, Titan never liked taking those types to sensitive areas, devious certified transportation resources or not. He preferred to stick with heroes when things were getting serious. "We appreciate your help," Jeremiah told Relocate. "It's a few more miles from here, something Gale can easily handle. I'm sure you need to get back to the rescue efforts. The requests are already flooding." And Relocate tapped his right ear, where dispatch was no doubt alerting him to the dozens of civilians in need of saving. The robot threat might be suppressed, but the damage they had done had left countless people trapped or in danger. Every hero that could be spared was pitching in to help, along with emergency services and dozens of peers' teams. "If you need to make a quick getaway, I can meet you here. Otherwise, there might be a wait for me to get back. This isn't a team that plans on running," Gale told him. "I didn't expect as much, but it seemed polite to offer." Relocate took one last look at his surroundings, refreshing his memory to make the trip back easier, and vanished in a shimmer of static. "Gale, if you could follow my heading," Jeremiah said, stepping to the front. "There might be defenses out here. The nearer we get to the signal source, the greater chance of that, so everyone be on guard. Ether, be ready to shift Gale and deadlift if we come under fire." "What about you?" Eder didn't bother asking about Titan, because the answer was obvious. He didn't need to be intangible. The very best those robots had thrown at him didn't leave as much as a mark on anything other than his suit. The bots were strong, but Titan had fought stronger. "I'll be fine," Jeremiah assured her. "Worry about these two. Although Gale, do your powers work when you're intangible?" "Never had occasion to find out," Gale said. "Guess today's a good chance to learn." Deadlift let out a soft groan. "Let's not tempt fate. Hopefully we'll make it to the signal without needing to take evasive actions." Hope in one hand, spit in the other. Jeremiah didn't bother finishing the saying, instead listening attentively to a voice coming through his calm. As he sat silent, Gale took the opportunity to whip up a whirlwind, raising them all from the ground. Jeremiah was in the front, since he'd be pointing the way with Deadlift and Gale on either side of Eder, so she could reach them. Titan was in the rear, a hardy shield in case something tried to come at them from behind. "That way," Jeremiah said, finally gesturing out toward a hill overgrown with lush green trees. "Based on the topography my people are looking at, we'll pass over to hills and a small lake before we get to the right area." With no more than the point of a finger, they were off, tearing through the sky at breakneck speeds. Though she was doing a good job staying controlled, Titan could nearly feel the rage coming from Gale. He liked Brewster, but to him it was just a city. To her, however, it was a place of incredible importance. It was where her team had been based for decades, where the legacy of elemental fury took root. More than that, she'd lived there for years. She knew the city and the people in it intimately. This attack hadn't just been horrific for her on a human level, it had hit her personally. When they found whoever was responsible for it, Titan knew he was going to have to move fast. If the culprit wasn't captured quickly, Gale might do something she would ultimately live to regret. Killing was never easy, and if it was done without need, she'd be weighed down by that sin for the rest of her life. The ground below them flew by in no time. They were zipping past the lake Jeremiah had described. He motioned for Gale to begin their descent near. As Titan could tell, there was nothing that marked the area they were heading for as noteworthy, just a small ravine and more hills full of trees. Of course, if the base could be seen from the sky, they wouldn't have needed to use such extreme tracking methods in the first place. Slowly following Jaramir's directions, Gale brought them down past the lip of the ravine, deeper into the crevice, where the late afternoon sun could scarcely reach. At last, Titan felt the familiar sensation of earth beneath his feet. It turned out that the ravine was deeper than he'd perceived from the sky, a narrow slice in the land that felt like two walls looming over them. Thankfully, Hero Gear didn't lose signal. Easily, Jaramir began trekking across the rocky terrain, following the guidance of his unseen team. The more Titan watched modus operandi accomplish, the more curious he was about the other members. It wasn't unheard of for subtlety heroes to buck the spotlight, but a whole team represented by one hero seemed peculiar. Then again, they were bound to be making all manner of enemies given how efficient they were, and subtlety heroes often weren't known for their combat skills. Maybe putting up one lone giant target to go after made sense, assuming Jaramir could handle the burden. We're getting close, Jaramir called, waving for them to follow. The signal is coming from nearby, and my team says this is the most likely point to have an entrance. If we don't find one, then I'm going to need Eder to do some intangible recon through the rock, and then Titan can bust open. Before Jaramir could finish his plan, he took one step too far, and what seemed to be nothing more than a clump of rocks suddenly sprang to life. It whirred and clicked, whipping around and locking the barrel of its laser gun directly on Jaramir. Titan started running as soon as he saw the motion, but he wasn't nearly fast enough. The sound of a high-pitched whine filled the air, then a flash of red shot from the barrel. After that, there was only Titan's thundering footsteps and the soft slump of a body hitting the ground. The hole in Jaramir's chest, where his heart should be, was still smoking, the horrid smell of roasting flesh wafting through the air. The gun was nothing more than scrap metal after two of Titan's blows, both of which were far stronger than were strictly necessary. Though he hadn't yet turned to make the confirmation, he knew what he'd witnessed while dashing over Jaramir was dead. Whatever enhanced endurance he might have had wasn't enough to withstand the laser blast. A hole in the chest was enough to kill pretty much anything, even a super. With the remains of the laser throwing off sparks, Titan turned to find the others clustered around Jaramir, whose blood was soaking into the rocks. No doubt about it, he was dead, likely had been before he hit the ground. Ether's face was pale, and Deadlift seemed to be sniffling under his mask. The poor kid probably hadn't lost too many friends in the field. Yet much as Titan wanted to mourn the loss of a comrade, a loss hitting Titan harder than he'd expected. Jaramir's death meant nothing if they didn't finish the job we need to. Titan's words died on his tongue as Jaramir's pulsing blood suddenly halted, then began to flow back into his blown-apart torso. As it did, the burned-out chunks of flesh lengthened and bones regrew. The whole process took perhaps 5 seconds. But when it was done, Jaramir's body bore no sign of any injury whatsoever. If that alone wasn't disturbing enough, the sound of a rough cough escaped the fallen hero's lips, and he shook his head as if coming out of a long nap. What the fuck? Arthur screeched, turning insubstantial and leaping backward. Even for people who dealt with superhuman abilities, someone coming back from the dead was a bit much. Gale and Deadlift both took defensive postures as well. Bracing for attack was their default reaction in strange situations. Sorry about that, Jaramir said, voice as calm as if he hadn't just had his heart hollowed out seconds earlier. Little inconvenient, I know, but at least now we know to be on guard for traps. You were dead. Titan looked around for any proof of the injury, splatters of blood or flecks of bone, yet there was no sign of it aside from the hole in Jaramir's shirt. Even the blood stains on the rocks were gone. This is impossible. What you just did goes way beyond regeneration. This is time manipulation. Come on, if I was the first super to travel through time, you don't think I'd work on a slightly grander scale than running a team of subtlety heroes? Jaramir slowly pulled himself to his feet and gestured over to the broken wreckage of the gun that had slain him. Besides, if I never got shot, then you never would have beaten that device halfway to electronic hell. Appreciate that. By the way, Jaramir, we all just watched you die. Regeneration can't fix death. Do you really expect us to just let this pass with no explanation? Gale's eyes were narrowed, her emotions torn between relief and uncertainty of what to make of such a display. At the very least, we need to know how much damage you can come back from. Before we go any further, Deadlift thrust a thumb down the ravine where logic said there were no doubt more traps lying in wait for them. Not to be a dick about it, but knowing what actually kills you tells us who we should prioritize helping if things turn to shit. Without warning, Jeremiah turned the argument around a few times before evidently landing on agreement with the point. Very well, but I'm only giving you all the cursory overview. As a subtlety hero, I know far too well how important it is to have a few secrets kept close to the vest, especially about weaknesses. The long and short of it is that my body doesn't regenerate technically. It's more apt to say that I lock my physical form in at a certain time, and my ability maintains that status quo no matter what happens. What the hell does that mean? Ether had largely recovered from her outburst, though she was still giving Jeremiah a wary eye as he explained no one, least of all Jeremiah, blamed her for the caution. Seeing a corpse pull itself back together was unsettling. On a lot of levels, it means I pick a day when I'm exactly where I want to be, fit, strong, energetic, and without any aches or pains. Then I activate my power, and until I turn it off, that's my body, regardless of outside forces like giant robots or laser cannons or time. It was Titan who interrupted, realizing exactly what Jeremiah was describing. Immortality. Maybe not perfect. If he was keeping secrets, then there was bound to be a flaw or two in the ability. No power was unbeatable, yet if he really did lock his body, like he was describing, it meant aging wasn't something he had to fear. The wide grin on Jeremiah's face answered before he formed the first syllables of his glib reply. I haven't had enough years to say for certain, but by all accounts going forward, I'm going to look extremely good for my age, whatever that might be. Though at the rate I'm mowing through uniforms, I'll have a huge clothing bill and a lot of unpleasant death memories. Wait, do you remember dying from the laser? Gale asked. I remember everything that happens to me before the power gets triggered, Jeremiah told her. That's the drawback to my ability. I can recall every single time my life has ended, and let me tell you, those memories are not sunshine and rainbows. Still, it's the gift I have, so I make the most of it, and it sounds like a hell of a good one. But I think it's about time we started using my power. Titan turned toward the direction the laser gun had sprung up from. Everyone stay here, I'm going to see if there are any more traps waiting. He began jogging forward through the ravine's narrow walls. Within the first few steps, another gun burst forth from the rocks, firing directly at Titan's torso. The burning energy hit his already exposed flesh. It fizzled uselessly just before Titan returned the blow, his force leaving only shattered scrap behind. A few more feet, and another gun appeared quickly, meeting the same fate further in, and an explosion from the ground tried to blow off his leg, succeeding only in tearing up his boot. Titan continued on undeterred. Seeing a friend die, even if only for a few moments, had been just the kick in the ass he needed to remind him of his role in situations like this. It had been a long time since Titan was doing real hero work, but with each step forward, it was coming back to him. His place was at the front, taking on every attack the enemy could throw, making sure his team stayed safe. Titan would stand against the full assault, and only when it was spent would he call the others to follow. That was what it meant to be a team's shield. As it turned out, they didn't need Eder to search the walls for an entrance. The traps and devices Titan was charging through, while no doubt designed to keep unwanted guests from ever getting near the hidden base, served in this case as a trail of breadcrumbs leading the team of heroes right to the door. True, it looked like nothing more than a ravine wall marking a natural end to their journey, but with one punch from Titan, before any of the others could arrive to suggest a more nuanced entrance, the reinforced door blew backward in shards, revealing a softly lit smooth metal hallway leading deeper underground. Well, there goes any element of surprise we might have had, Jeremiah noted as he Gale Eder and Deadlift emerged from the wake of Titan's destruction. Between the cannons, mines, and laser grids, I have a feeling anyone in here already knew we were coming. Titan replied, words purposely absent anything resembling an apology. If I can't surprise an enemy, I prefer to let them know I mean business, and nothing says I wipe my ass with your security quite like punching a door off its hinges. Actually, it looks like this didn't have hinges. It rose up to let people in, making it all the harder to knock down. Deadlift had walked to the doorway and was staring into the ruined mechanism of the entrance. Quite a functional design, I mean under different circumstances, since time is now officially not on our side. How about we get going with this? Gale suggested. Jeremiah, do those voices in your head happen to have any insight on where the signal is coming from? Or are we flying blind from this point on? Hey, they got us here, didn't they? Jeremiah bristled, a touch more bothered by the barb than by his death only a few moments prior. And no, I don't have direct lock on where we need to go. They can play hot and cold using my location and the signal strength, but this place is too deep and well shielded to get the signal's exact coordinates. Besides, the machine sending the orders and the super who built it aren't guaranteed to be in the same position, and we need to stop the latter. More than the former. Then it looks like we're splitting up. Ether had gone intangible and walked down the hallway unbeknownst to the rest of them, until she came sauntering back up. Thought I'd do a bit of recon while you bickered about plans. The hallway splits off in 3 directions from here. If we're hunting to separate targets, then it seems like we've got to cover all the branches to be safe. Safe would be moving as a team down each one until we'd search them all, Titan pointed out, but that gives our super better odds of escaping. Gale countered. Ether is right, we need to scour the base as quickly as possible. 5 doesn't split up evenly, so we'll pair off as needed. Deadlift, you're a rookie, no offense, which means I'll feel better seeing you with someone who knows what they're doing. Go with Titan, since Jeremiah is apparently unkillable, but lacks much in terms of offense. He and Ether should be able to skirt past any obstacles they encounter. I'll take on my path solo. Shouldn't Titan go solo? Deadlift suggested. He's the one who would be in the least danger of getting hurt or captured. Gale can take care of herself just as well as I can, Titan said quickly, hoping to cut Gale off before she tore into the relatively new hero. She leads a team into dangerous situations all the time, and her power is suited to offense and defense. What she can't do is shield someone else as easily as I can. You're with me, because if things go bad, I'll hopefully be able to take the brunt of whatever gets thrown at us. Make sure to stay behind him. Jeremiah patted Deadlift softly on the back. Unlike me, your insides probably don't put themselves back together once they see daylight. Titan didn't bother adding any agreement to Jeremiah's words. The image of his corpse splayed out on the ground was still fresh in all their minds, a perfect reminder of where one misstep in situations like these could lead. Instead, he headed down the hallway, once again taking his position ahead of the others. Unlike his trek through the ravine, Titan's heavy footsteps didn't trigger any cannons or traps. Only echoes met him as he plunged deeper into the hidden base. Soon he arrived at the split Eder had described. 3 hallways branching off from the one he'd descended. Rather than waste more time debating, Titan merely looked back to make sure Deadlift was following and walked right up the one in the middle. From behind, Titan heard Deadlift's hurried steps as he ran to catch up, while Gale, Jeremiah, and Ether all went to either side of them. Without knowing where any of this led, it was impossible to say who was on the fastest path or the most dangerous, though Titan did have a hunch or two. Is there a reason you picked the middle hall? Deadlift asked, speaking up to be heard from the several feet behind Titan, where he was trailing. It's fine if it's random, but since I've been so strongly reminded of my rookie status, I thought I might as well ask so I could learn something. A few more heavy steps and Titan caught sight of a bend in the hall. It might have been his imagination, but it seemed like a different source of light than the gently glowing bulbs along the wall was shining from around the corner. It wasn't random, Titan told Deadlift, even as he held up his hand for the other hero to stop advancing. You need to hang back here. There might be something ready to fire as soon as I turn the corner, and I'd rather not have you caught up in the blast if it's explosive. If we hadn't just walked through a valley of mechanical death, I might call you paranoid. Despite the sass, Deadlift came to an immediate stop, even going so far as to take a few steps backward. What's my cue that it's safe to follow? Depends. I might just yell for you, though there's always the chance that the room will be soundproofed, so I may come back this way or pass a message through dispatch. Just be ready to move if I give an order, especially if that order is to run. Consider me raring to go, Deadlift replied. Titan started forward again, but Deadlift's voice caused him to stop as it yelled one last question from behind. If it's not random, then why did you pick the middle hall? Just a hunch built on experience. Titan's mind swam back through the years of busting into bases, layers, and dens of criminal activity. They didn't always have time to prepare defenses. But when they did, most followed a similar pattern. Everyone almost always puts the bulk of their defenses up the middle, and there was no way I was going to let someone else have all our fun. Though he was braced for attack, the light from around the corner wasn't coming from any sort of cannon bomb or even menacing robot that would have made sense. No, what Titan found awaiting him as he headed down this new bend of the hall was far stranger than a mere defense mechanism. It was a catwalk, half-rusted steel, stretching out over a deep hole. Before several elevators, he tested the metal carefully, expecting it to give way under his sizable weight, but found it didn't even wobble. Looking closer, Titan realized that while the initial structure had aged poorly, new parts had been rotated in to secure everything in place with each step. He waited, sure something from the dark chasm beneath his feet, where elevator rails went deeper than he could make out, would come leaping up to attack him. Yet his movement was greeted only by the barely audible echoes of what sounded like some sort of distant activity. Dispatch put me in everyone's ear, Titan said, without bothering to wait for confirmation. He continued, deadlift, you can go ahead and follow me, and just be careful. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure I walked into the top floor of a mining operation. Please don't tell me this whole thing was just old man Carruthers digging for diamonds and trying to throw people off the scent at our side if we unmask a Scooby-Doo villain after all that destruction. I'm going to be so pissed. Just throwing out a guess, but they might have been digging for, or Jeremiah said they probably dug out as much as they could and bought up the rest on the down low. Robots take metal, and unless you've got access to a relay gifted super metal doesn't make itself. That would have to be a lot of, or Gail told them from her side of the mic. Titan thought he could pick up the muffled sounds of wind and a small explosion. Also, I'm at a welcoming committee, not many of them yet, but stay on guard. Yeah, be glad you're not with us. Adler's voice was full of something that was not quite awe, but certainly a sense of being impressed. We found the factory section that's churning those bots out. Things are up and running, though most of them are incomplete. I think they sent every bot they had out after us today. Well, almost. Jeremiah's tone was about as close to worried as Titan had heard it since the giant mechs dropped from the sky. I found what appear to be spare parts for a pretty sizable bot that doesn't look like anything we've fought so far. Smart Money says this place has a watchdog that was left behind. Titan heard the sound of footsteps on the catwalk and swung around, ready to beat back whatever mechanical guardian had been sent to stop him. Instead, he found Deadlift, who took a very healthy step back, even though he was well out of punching range. Sorry, Titan mumbled, forcing himself to relax. I'm a little on edge. And why wouldn't you be? We're just poking around a hidden massive robot factory standing atop a patchwork walkway over what sure looks like an infinite hole to nowhere. Deadlift took a careful peek over the side, then immediately pulled himself back to the center of the catwalk. Okay, seriously, how in the hell did a place like this get built under our noses? From the looks of most of the stuff here, I think it was made a long time ago. Jeremiah told them a lot of this equipment is crazy high tech, but everything non-essential is still rusty and broken. This place might have been built back before Brewster was ever much of a metropolis. Old lair of a criminal who either went to jail or was buried is my guess, probably found by someone who didn't mind a fixer upper. Not the first opportunistic squatter I've had to oust, Gail said. When this is over, we probably need to catalog this place and see what all is here. If it was a villain's lair, there might be useful files or documents. Hey, don't go stealing my lines. I don't run around kicking the shit out of bad guys from midair, Jeremiah replied. Titan ignored them, not because he disagreed, but because his focus for the moment was on making it across the rest of the catwalk. Near the middle, things had gotten a bit shakier, and while the catwalk continued to hold his weight, Titan again found himself looking down to the empty gulf of darkness at his feet and wondering how long it would take him to climb back up. More importantly, he tried to figure out how he'd save Deadlift if the metal floor did give way mercifully. He didn't need to think up an answer, as they both eventually made it all the way to the end of the catwalk and set foot back on the shiny silver ground. Titan continued forward until he reached a fork in the path. He began down the right side, holding up his hand so Deadlift would wait. Within a minute, he could feel the heat coming from up ahead. If they were mining, or then they'd need a forge, and while it was possible His prey was hiding in there. Titan found it highly unlikely. This much heat from this far off meant the temperature in the forge was more than any human, without enhanced endurance, could comfortably withstand. It was possible, true, but his gut said to check the other branch first before going after long shots. Backtracking to deadlift, Titan headed down the left path, which after a minute proved to be absent of the wall of heat. He called for deadlift to follow, who did so at a safe distance. They wound their way deeper into the hidden base, passing a few dusty workstations that had held up surprisingly well and one ancient computer that looked like it weighed more than the desk it was sitting on. Along the way they got progress reports from the others who were encountering similar findings. One thing worried Titan as they made their way farther through the halls. The others were dealing with patrols, never too many, and none so strong that they weren't easily handled. But still the other heroes were fighting robots. Meanwhile he and Deadlift continued to encounter a whole lot of nothing. It was unnerving all the more. So because Titan had thought this would be the most perilous path, why was this one seemingly undefended? As it turned out, the answer to that question was waiting for him a few turns further down the hallway. In one angled step, Titan left the ubiquitous shiny hallway and entered a massive room with a dome-shaped ceiling. From the number of shattered chairs and retro couches, Titan guessed that once upon a time this had been some sort of break or social room that was long since past, though standing amidst the wreckage that it must have created while opening up the area was a 9-foot tall robot unlike any that Titan had seen before. Thick limbs, glass eyes pulsing with green light, and all manner of small devices adorned the various nooks and crannies of its body. Titan didn't even bother to turn. He trusted that Deadlift would take one look at the situation and know to stay back. This thing wasn't like the smaller robots. This was something special, maybe even a new model, a sneak preview at what would have come with the next encounter. "Hey guys," Titan said, moving carefully into the large room. "Got a hunch that I found the watchdog." As his foot crossed from the hallway over the room's threshold, the robot bolted forward. That Titan had been expecting. What came next, however, took him by surprise. Its unwavering gaze stayed trained on him as its mouth parted and a thick electronic voice echoed around them. "You, of all the things Titan had seen the robots do since their arrival in Brewster, talking had never been among their bag of tricks." Hearing the robot angrily yell at him in recognition was enough to take even Titan by surprise, which was why he was a few seconds slow in raising his arm to stop the giant metal fist surging toward him. He managed a half block. Not that it made much difference. The blow sent him spiraling through the air until he crashed into a nearby wall, leaving a sizable dent in the dense material. If its talking had been a surprise, then the robot moving him was an outright shocker. True, he hadn't been properly braced for the attack, but he still should have been able to compensate for such a strike. It hadn't even felt that strong, really, at least not compared to attacks from some of the more powerful supers he'd brought down through the years. Yet he'd gone sailing like he was still fresh out of the HCP, and that was no small feat for anyone to accomplish. "Do we know each other?" Titan asked, hurriedly rising to his feet and getting into a proper fighting stance. A surprise attack was one thing, but he'd be damned if he let this metal bastard toss him around so easily again. "I know you. Ever since you appeared, the game has been tilted. You are an unbalanced resource and must be removed from the board. Father searched the enemy archives for every bit of data and video about you, Titan. Then he gave me strength and knowledge so that I could destroy you again." The robot charged, not even missing a syllable in its rant. As it dashed across the floor, another punch flew, this one on track for Titan's head. But the metal opponent no longer had the advantage of surprise. Titan grabbed the fist as it drew near him, spinning the arm over his shoulder as he aimed to throw the robot into the wall. It tried to counter, instantly showing that perhaps the speech about knowing his moves hadn't been a bluff. Unfortunately for it, every counter it attempted relied on taking control of the movement or breaking Titan's grip, and the strength difference between them was just too much for it to overcome. A loud cracking filled the air as the robot's torso smashed into the wall, eclipsing Titan's dent with one of its own. Rather than lie there or try and break the firm grip Titan still had on its arm, the robot kicked its legs against the wall. It was a small motion, and at its current angle leverage was almost impossible, which was why Titan was all the more shocked As they both went spinning through the air in his moment of confusion, the arm in his clutches slipped away, and they both landed on the ground several feet apart. "You've got one of those gravity distortion things," Titan said, understanding finally setting in. "That's how you sent me flying. Before one of the many tools I was equipped with to bring you down." The robot couldn't smile. Its facial features weren't constructed in such a way to accommodate expressions. All the same, Titan could swear there was something like a grin on its face as he watched the indentation of his handprint on its arm slowly undent. "Great, this one had the self-repair capacity too. You are an improper variable, Titan. The abilities you possess alone are imbalanced. But far worse is the effect you have on other enemy resources. Small threats become larger, and non-threats become tremendously unbalanced assets. In their own right, the common link at the scenes was you can sway the tide of engagements. And so I was made especially to counteract your presence. Yeah, they should have put more pistons in your arms. Then I can barely even feel your attacks." Titan replied. Something wasn't sitting easy with him. This robot had to know that in terms of power it was massively inferior to him. Yet it didn't seem rattled in the slightest. If anything, it was cocky. That was strange enough. Who built dickishness into his simulated personality? But obviously there was some hidden card yet to be played, and the robot seemed to think it would turn things around. And not even with all the resources Father collected was he able to fashion a creature to match your strength. The robot agreed. But not every engagement needs to be won by force, and not every punch is just a punch. His feet were off the floor before he had a chance to so much as grab for the ground. Not that it would have helped. As he rose rapidly into the air, Titan groped and spun, trying to wriggle free of whatever force was holding him captive. The trouble was that there didn't seem to be anything to fight against. It was like the strings keeping him anchored to the ground had been cut, and now he was just drifting in place with no method of moving forward. Though this last engagement was lost, Father gained a tremendous amount of data in the battles. "I am the first of the next line, rushed and imperfect. Though I was still gifted with the newest innovations Father could conceive of. He was inspired by the way you all crawled about in his mighty destroyer units. So he began producing insect-sized units that easily could be planted on an enemy. Normally they would burrow into the skin, destroying the resource from the inside out. In your case, however, they serve as precise targeting locations, allowing the room's gravity distorter to manipulate your local field just perfectly enough to remove you from the battle." Titan whipped his gaze around and caught sight of a small ant-sized speck of metal as it moved between the burned-away sections of his shirt. As he did, he took notice of the room again. This time, with fresh eyes, he'd assumed the disarray of broken furniture had been cleared from the room center for a slugfest. Now he understood the real purpose. The robot had taken away anything with which he might grab and use to navigate this room too. With its high domed ceiling, had probably been selected for the task. Even the robot's appearance, bulky and muscular, had been meant to lure him in with melee expectations. The whole thing was a giant trap, and he'd stepped right into it like a damn rookie. So what now? Titan asked. His mind worked furiously as he tried to figure out what to do next. The projectiles he kept for such occasions were in a compartment on his belt. But with how resilient these robots were, there was no guarantee that even a perfect throw would take his opponent down. He needed to think of something, and soon. "You're going to use me as a punching bag until you build up enough strength to do some damage. If you're supposed to destroy me, this is a pretty piss-poor job of it." "Oh, have no fear, there are new weapons Father wants to test. You'll make an excellent guinea pig, but that comes later. And as for destroying you, a captured enemy asset is a neutralized asset. That will do until a permanent solution can be found. In the meantime, we both know you're not the only enemy who is attempting to assail Father's base." The robot turned, looking down the hallway where Deadlift would be still waiting on a signal from Titan to move forward. "I'll handle you after I'm done neutralizing the rest of your fellow assets." 122. Despite his initial impulse, Titan forced himself to stay calm as he watched the robot head toward the hallway. Getting angry, while useful in the right moments of battle, did jack shit to aid clear thinking. Stepping into this trap was bad enough. He couldn't afford to stay snared while that bastard went after the other supers. In terms of power alone, they were probably better than the bot, but the way it had been so perfectly equipped to deal with him left Titan fearful. That he wasn't the only one it knew how to stop, especially separated as they were. It might just manage to get the upper hand. Even if it succeeded once, that was too many times. He had to think of something fast to keep the damn robot's attention on him. Yanking free one of his projectiles, Titan let the steel ball fly directly into the metal back. It pierced the surface cleanly, so cleanly that Titan realized he put more power into the throw than intended, before bursting out the other side and slamming into the ground. The robot, now with a small hole running through its body, turned to look at Titan, yet remained silent. "I didn't think we were done having our match," Titan said, another orb dancing along in the palm of his hand. "A quaint notion. My brothers might have fallen for that, prioritizing the immediate threat over what seemed to be secondary ones. But today you showed Father that we are weakened if we rely on his instructions alone. I was made greater, smarter, closer to his image, and I know a petty attempt at distraction. When I see it, you are neutralized." Titan accepted gracefully, as a good resource should for someone who's so smart. "You don't seem to know shit about how comms work." That voice came from neither Titan nor the robot, but rather from Deadlift, who had darted around the corner. Over his head was a massive bucket so large it must have been scraping the hallway's ceiling, securely nestled inside a dense section of metal at least 3 feet thick. Even a normal strong man would have struggled with the load, or at least been slowed by it. But Deadlift moved as if it weighed no more than a thought, which for him it likely didn't. The asset known as Deadlift, high strength capacity observed, but minimal ability to withstand damage. The robot said. Its left hand began to glow with an ominous green light, one that Titan had no doubt would cut through the younger hero, just like Jeremiah in the ravine, except obviously that Deadlift didn't have any healing powers. Permanent neutralization will be whatever the robot's opinions on neutralization might have been. They went unheard as Deadlift swung his bucket forward. While the metal ship talker was no doubt expecting some sort of solid mass, Titan's vantage point afforded him a peek inside the container to the red-hot liquid bubbling within. Deadlift had raided the forge, which explained why there was a massive container between his hands and bucket. He swung his weapon, and a golden red liquid sprayed through the air in a wave of molten destruction. Moving with appropriately inhuman speed, the robot darted to the side, getting clear of the fiery goop. Before it had entirely left the bucket, their opponent came up with its arm raised, a muzzle sliding out from between its ring and middle finger as the whole hand restructured itself into a ranged weapon, taking aim. It again almost looked like it was smiling just before it squeezed off the shot. "You missed it," declared, and fired on Deadlift. The beam of energy, no doubt meant to tear flesh and organs apart down to their very molecules, failed to pierce its target. This was not the fault of the robot's aim or the gun's firing. Rather, it was because a massive slab of muscular torso still coated in burning hot metal raced forward and put itself between the beam and Deadlift. No, he didn't. Titan could actually feel the heat from the molten liquid as it dripped down his skin, which spoke volumes to just how hot it really was. Deadlift hadn't managed to coat Titan completely in the stuff, but he'd gotten good coverage enough to instantly kill a large number of those damn tiny robots crawling on Titan's skin, while the residual heat cooked the rest, with no mini-bots to target. The gravity field couldn't lock on, and Titan was once again a free man. "Thanks for the assist," he said, never daring to take his eyes off the robot, who still had a gun trained on him. "I might be a rookie, but I still know enough to listen in for a teammate having a tough time." Deadlift replied, "I can see that now. Why don't you slip back into the hallway real quick? This is about to get nasty, and I don't want any collateral damage." Titan darted forward, well aware that Deadlift would need a distraction to get clear. That was something he was happy to provide, as all the anger he'd been keeping at bay finally had an outlet, and it was the momentarily befuddled mechanical bastard right in front of him. The robot opened its mouth, probably to make a quip, but Titan didn't bother listening. It had been too long. He'd gotten used to working as a corporeal. There were all manner of excuses he could make for himself about why he'd fallen into such a simple trap. None of them would have mattered, though, not if he let his fellow heroes pay the price for his mistake. Thanks to Deadlift, he'd gotten a second chance. As a man who knew how rare those were, Titan had no inclination to waste it. His first punch shattered the bot's Left arm, the one it had used to try and kill his friend as he attacked the robot, tried to throw more of the mini-bots on him. The smelted liquid was still burning strong though, and they dissolved as soon as they made contact. The heat was adding something extra to his punches, as well flecks of molten metal spraying onto the robot and sizzling atop its exterior. The left arm was scrap in seconds, smashed apart with extra blows to ensure it couldn't be put back together. This is improper. The robot was backpedaling, trying to put distance between itself and the rampaging Titan. You are an imbalanced resource. That asset shouldn't have even been here, let alone been skilled enough to aid you. You shouldn't exist. There are plenty of people who agree with you. Go ahead and get in line. Titan kept after it, refusing to allow any chance for new plans to spring into the damn thing's head. This was how he should have attacked from the start. It wasn't his job to play with these things. Taking his time and enjoying the fights, he was supposed to clear the path no matter what lay ahead of him. Another strike, and this time the robot's right leg broke away, turned to shards under Titan's stomping feet. A flash of red light filled the air as the robot fired from a gun on its right hand. The laser hit well right in Titan's torso, but only succeeded in leaving a small red dot on his chest. That alone was pretty impressive by Titan standards anyway. Seeing its attack fail, his opponent attempted to flee, crawling away slowly with its remaining limbs. While the cocky tone had faded, what remained was pleading, so close to human it nearly made Titan hesitate. Then he remembered the attempt to kill his teammate seconds ago, and he continued his pursuit. Why do you exist? The thing asked. Why do you continue breaking the parameters? Another audible crunch as Titan wrecked the last leg. The right arm half-heartedly swung around to clock him, and he caught it effortlessly. The robot stared up at him, its last limb captured. Small compartments on its chest opened, deploying miniature bombs and laser blasts that bounced uselessly off Titan's looming body. Why won't you quit? Why won't you just die? That's easy, Titan said, ripping the last arm free from the robot's body and wrapping his mighty hand around its dense head. Because I haven't earned the right yet. One tug, and the head was clear of the torso. Less than a minute later, the body was reduced to scrap. Titan stood over it, waiting to see if enough remained to try and repair. Only when it remained still did he relax, turning the robot's head around in his hands as he looked at the destruction scattered throughout the room. When you die, it's over, Titan said, all too aware he was talking to a lifeless hunk of metal. No more work or fear or responsibility. I don't deserve that kind of peace, not until I make amends for all the things I've fucked up. It took some time for Deadlift and Titan to continue on, mostly because the latter paused to try and get as much molten liquid off his body as possible. As the material cooled, it became easier. A few flexed muscles could shatter the hardened metal, but it still required a solid 5 minutes before Titan felt he'd wiped away enough to continue. During that time, Deadlift said nothing, merely watching in amusement, as the older hero was annoyed by a substance that would have killed most people outright, supers included. You really are indestructible, aren't you? Deadlift noted as Titan finally stopped trying to clean himself off. I had a hunch that stuff wasn't going to kill you. I mean, I've seen you take a lot of damage, but you didn't even lose a step. It could have just as easily been room temperature water for how much it bothered you. No one is invincible or indestructible or unkillable, Titan replied automatically. Not me, not people like Jeremiah. No one. Always keep that in mind when supers forget that bad things happen. Sometimes they go out of control with power and need to be brought down. Sometimes they lose their nerve during a tough fight and innocent people die. No power is perfect. As someone who has spent a big chunk of his life training and fighting other supers, I should know. Titan looked around the room, noting that there was only one exit out aside from the hallway they'd entered through, with nowhere else to go. Their path forward was obvious as they began to leave. However, he noticed that Deadlift was keeping closer than before. It was tempting to chastise the rookie, but given that Deadlift had just saved him and possibly the rest of the team, Titan held his tongue. The kid had shown good judgment so far. If he wanted to stay closer, then that was his call. For now, you know, I've gotten that speech from a lot of people, Dean Bishop Key among them, yet every time I see more of what you can do, I find myself wondering just how true it is. Maybe someone could have killed you when you were young and inexperienced, but now I watched you lift a mech today, Titan, and shrug off. Who knows how many attacks you're really going to stand there and tell me you've never once considered the possibility that you might be the exception to the rule without. Warning Titan stopped walking, he turned to face Deadlift, all too aware that their comms were still on. That was fine, though this was something the others should hear, just in case they ever needed the information. Strong as I am, Deadlift, I'm still vulnerable to things I haven't faced before. True, after years of hero work, that's a small category. But it's a big world with new supers appearing all the time. And to answer your question, no, I've never thought myself invincible, because I know how the DVA plans to kill me if I ever go out of control. Lifting his hand, Titan delicately tapped the side of his temple 3 times. There's a super out in Kentucky with the power to manifest brain aneurysms. Never went hero since he didn't think his power was suited to protecting people. But sometimes the DVA taps him to bring down especially dangerous or troublesome criminals. Temporarily authorized hero asset, same exception they used for Hexalon and Eli. I've got no resistance to that ability, and I've never been called on a case to fight anyone with similar powers. That's how they'll kill me if I ever go rogue. Holy hell, Eder whispered over the comms. They told you about this, just gave you the name of your executioner in case you ever stepped foot out of line. Actually, Titan was the one who suggested we keep the aforementioned super on retainer, just in case. Dispatch was as calm as ever, slipping in only to correct a misassumption in the conversation, and then going silent. Why would you do that, Deadlift asked Jeremiah. Gale, either of you wanted to field this one for me? Titan asked. Because heroes need to be aware of their mortality, Gale replied. For those of us like me and Deadlift, because it keeps us smart and safe in dangerous situations. For those like Titan and Jeremiah, it keeps them grounded, reminds them that even their actions have consequences. Deadlift stared at Titan with new eyes, though whether they were filled with respect or incredulity, Titan didn't have time to puzzle out. He merely turned back around and continued walking down the mysterious hallway, idly wondering if he'd have to fight another of those talking robots. He hoped not. There was something about destroying an opponent who could have conversations that left a bad taste in Titan's mouth. AI was impossible as far as the official records went, but that didn't mean it would stay that way forever. As an aside, the DVA probably has assets that Titan isn't aware of to tap backups in case he decides to snuff out his fail-safe in advance. Jeremiah added, I've poked around enough to know they've got contingency plans for me, and I'm nowhere near as dangerous as he is. Well, not as immediately dangerous anyway, given a little time and research. I can be a real bastard in my own right. Yeah, well, you need to get your bastard ass over to me. Gale said. I could be wrong, but I think I just found what we're looking for. Before he'd even realized he was moving, Titan's hands had already formed fists. All that destruction, all those people hurt, or worse, if he was mad, then Gale must be outright murderous. They had to pray she'd found the computer rather than the super, otherwise no one would be able to stop her if she decided to take revenge. Did you find the computer or the guy who built it? Titan asked, unclenching his fists so that he could cross his fingers. Both. I think it's pretty damn weird if you want the truth. The anger Titan had noticed in her earlier seemed to be ebbing, replaced with confusion. I'd love some second opinions, especially from those of you who actually know something about tech. Great idea. But how do we get to you? Deadlift asked, using the communicators for coordinates. I believe I can offer rudimentary directions to Gale's location. Dispatch offered. I have been mapping the facility as your teams progressed, and there are several areas where I suspect paths intersect. In the event I am incorrect, the barriers between hallways would be easily overcome, be it by strength or intangibility. Oh good. So I might have to punch through walls in an underground lair with who knows how much rock overhead. Nothing to worry about there. Despite his grumbling, Titan trusted Dispatch's judgment. There was really no other option as a hero, and if Gale really had found something interesting, he wanted to get there as soon as possible. All right, Dispatch, tell us where to go. I'll be honest, I don't have the damnedest idea what I'm looking at here. Titan didn't particularly feel ashamed admitting that, both because he knew no one would be looking to him for technical expertise, and because he had a solid hunch that he wasn't the only baffled one in the group. Getting to Gale had been relatively painless. Dispatch's guesses were largely correct, and Titan only had to punch carefully through one wall in order to keep him and Deadlift on the right path. Once they arrived, However, both strong men immediately realized just how out of their depth they really were. The contraption before them was massive, so tall it went halfway up the 20-foot wall of this odd cavern, a mishmash of various electronics, lights, and devices that seemed to come from a half-dozen different technological periods. In the center was a modest-sized terminal with a dark screen directly adjacent to a large metal sphere with wires running all over the rest of the setup. It was the most striking point of the area in the first place, even without the corpse sitting in the chair. This is just a guess, mind you, but I'm going to say he's been dead for at least months, probably years, Eder announced while Jaromir was combing the wall of electronics, asking questions and getting unheard replies from the rest of his team. Ether had taken it upon herself to inspect the corpse hunched over in the chair. No one asked why. She felt familiar enough with decomposing remains to inspect them, though most just chose to assume she had some medical background and leave it at that. No immediate wounds that I can see, which points toward natural causes, an internal attack like poison or another super. This place doesn't have any signs of a struggle, but with how much work has been done, that doesn't tell us anything for sure. We'll need an autopsy to get solid information, but based on pure speculation, my guess would be that this guy sat down to do some work and then fell over dead midway through. Could be the ticker or the noggin or any number of things. But something gave out on him. You can tell that's a guy. Deadlift asked. The parts of his face that were visible under his mask had paled noticeably as Eder looked over the corpse. Geez, it's like none of you bothered to take a biology class. Yeah, I can tell it's a guy. You want me to go into how? Eder replied. Deadlift shook his head adamantly. To the negative. Eder didn't push the issue, which Titan appreciated. There was already so little of his costume left. The last thing he wanted was to get the remainder sprayed with vomit if Deadlift lost his stomach. Fortunately, the line of discussion quickly fell through as Jaromir clapped his hands from over by the console. All right, people, based on what my team can tell me through the comms, that we absolutely need to have a tech super come check this out. All accounts point to us having found the heart of the operation. This is the thing that's sending the signals, and most likely remote handling all the mining and robot construction. Then let's tear it apart. Gale summoned the beginnings of a tornado so quickly that the end of her sentence was muffled. Jaromir repositioned himself quickly between the terminal and Gale, a move Titan would have deemed brave if he didn't know Jaromir could heal from whatever wounds she inflicted. Yes, we could do that, or we could just work on disconnecting it from all the remote operations until someone with tech-based abilities can come study it, Jaromir suggested. As horrible as the robot attacks were, this still represents a marvel of technology. Look at the things it's been creating, adapting, and improving, all without human interference. Hell, not half an hour ago, it made a talking robot designed specifically to neutralize Titan just based on the battles we had today. That is some astounding work, even more so now that we know there was no human behind the wheel. All the better reason to destroy it now before it builds a threat we can't handle. Gale hadn't dismissed her wind of fact. That escaped none of their attention. Smart or not, this thing has been trying to wipe out us and Brewster as a whole for months. Titan was moving before he'd even realized it. Gale's words stirring the memory of Hexen's theory. The truth of the matter was, he agreed with Gale. Maybe this thing was a technological marvel unlike anything the world had ever seen. But it was also dangerous. He'd been forced to bring down fellow humans who'd managed far less damage. A machine didn't get a pass for the carnage in its wake, unless it didn't know any better before anyone could object, which they certainly would have. Titan moved the corpse away from the terminal, leaned over the ergonomic keyboard, and punched the space bar. For a long moment nothing happened, then slowly the dark screen began to flicker to life. At first Titan didn't know what he was looking at. He'd never had much interest in the digital realm. Bit by bit though, he puzzled together what he was seeing, and as it all clicked, he shook his head in disbelief. I'll be damned, Excellent was right. Looking over his shoulder, he motioned for the others to come see the screen for themselves. It's a game of time strategy or whatever the map looks like. Brewster too. I think our dead programmer was playing it when he died, maybe trying to train the computer to do exactly what it did. Probably part one in a nefarious scheme where the rest was never hatched. The rest of the group approached, taking in the display for themselves. It was all there, measured in bars and numbers that meant nothing to Titan, but some things were unmistakable. The map of Brewster, the 6 locations where the mechs had been deployed, even the little dots. Tracking the remaining heroes that were helping secure damaged areas. Weird as this is, and I am definitely not saying it isn't strange, I don't see how it changes things. Gale told them this computer is still bent on wiping out our town. I say we carve it up now before it has a chance. Gale, with all respect, do you have any idea what we're looking at here? Jeremiah asked. This thing created its own troops, researched classified technology, and stole it to improve them, adapted its designs and strategies based on how we reacted. It learned. I'm not the guy to say if something is or isn't artificial intelligence, but this has got to be the closest we've ever come as a species to creating it. You're talking about destroying one of the most incredible scientific achievements in history because some asshole left his game running. We've seen what it can do on accident. You really want to give someone the chance to use this thing on purpose? Gale countered. It's too strong, too dangerous. We have to destroy it now. You know, that's what a lot of humans said about supers when they first learned about us. Ether's voice was quiet yet strong enough to carry through the whole cavern. Something having the potential to be dangerous isn't a good reason to kill it. It's not alive. Gale shot back. Are you sure? I mean really sure. I heard the robot Titan fought, and it sounded pretty aware of what was going on. Misinformed, yes, but aware. Deadlift told her. I'm not saying you're wrong. In fact, I'm on your side. Gale, this thing nearly murdered me and my team with its robots, and it wrecked my town. It deserves to be killed. I'm just making sure we all acknowledge that that's what we're talking about. Killing machines aren't alive. Gale didn't sound as sure as she had moments prior, but she still refused to back down from her point in favor of wrecking it here and now. To against Jeremiah summarized. Titan, it looks like you're the deciding vote. Slowly, Titan walked from the terminal over to the dense metal sphere. Even if he knew almost nothing about high-tech electronics, he'd set up enough lights and media centers in his day to understand that the device all the wires ran to was the most important part. It was the heart, or maybe the brain. Regardless, he was pretty sure that if he smashed it to pieces, that would be the end of their problems. Titan raised his hand over the device, only a few inches from the dark polished surface. It wouldn't take much, one good blow, and it would all be over. I think, Titan said, slowly lowering his arm until his fingers rested against the smooth metal. That everyone deserves a second chance. Potential artificial life included. Epilogue. The restoration of Brewster would not be a quick process, though the heroes had performed admirably, containing the robotic threats and responding to unexpected challenges with speed and efficiency. The fact still remained that entire city blocks were rendered unlivable amidst the destruction. Within days, the DVA had set up temporary housing areas for those thrust from their homes. In a week, they brokered a deal between insurance companies and local hotels to get those impacted somewhere more stable. The first time a city was partially destroyed was a complete clusterfuck as everyone ran around trying to figure out what to do. Nowadays, however, the DVA had the process down. Not that their sole concern was taking care of the humans impacted by the disaster. One by one, every hero in a command position at the scene was brought in for debriefing. While things could have been worse, it didn't change the fact that people had still died and millions of dollars in property damage had occurred. That was the sort of aftermath the DVA couldn't afford to shrug off and accept, meaning they went through the scenario with a fine-toothed comb, making certain that no hero had acted rashly or used excessive force that might have exacerbated an already bad situation for his. Pardoan's interview was mercifully brief, though he had brought in a temporarily authorized hero asset and destroyed a mech with only one other hero as backup. He'd also been careful to run things through dispatch every chance. He had no one knew better than he that what the DBA wanted the most out of this was a scapegoat, someone or thing to point to as having failed. Their other option was telling the public that even with every hero doing their job well, incidents like this could still happen. Although it was true, that wasn't the sort of truth that made for a happy populace. They needed their heroes to be flawless or to have the imperfect ones cast aside. But the DVA would have to search elsewhere for its sacrificial super titan had played things careful and by the book. Which dispatch would back him up on? Lenny was waiting for him as Owen left the meeting and immediately yanked off the blue tie that was too small for his thick muscular neck. It looked all the more ridiculous atop his Titan costume, and Owen was glad to be rid of the idiotic formality. The short agent fell into line next to him as they walked over the polished stone floor of Brewster City Hall. The DBA had set up temporary offices during the research and recovery efforts, partially to be seen around town doing their duty and partially because it wasn't cost-effective to fly or teleport every hero they wanted to interview off to DC. Neither said a word until they were clear of the building, at which point Lenny lifted his bushy eyebrows upward and cast a scrutinizing glance at his client. "Well, I'm clear," Owen replied. What should have been cheer in his voice soured by the experience of telling his tale while panel sifted through every detail, searching for fault. "Unless they find something way out of left field that I'm not even aware of, nothing will blow back on me." That is quite the relief. Lenny dug about in his pockets until he found a pair of sunglasses that were comfortable, if not terribly up to date with the newest fashions. Overhead the afternoon, Brewster's sun beat down on them, warming the prominent bald spot on Lenny's exposed head. "Let me tell you, with all the orders we've got coming in for Titan merchandise, the last thing I needed is you to be under investigation. I can't imagine that much is really moving," Owen said. "Are you kidding me? Between the classic Titan gear, the new stylized versions, and that little photo of you going on everything. From shirts to mugs, we got suppliers dealing with serious back orders. And that's after I told them to stock up." Owen suppressed a groan at Lenny's mention of the picture, but only barely. Evidently amidst the brave reporters who'd ventured near the chaos of the battle was one especially intrepid photographer. That young woman was likely now a superstar at her paper, as she'd captured dozens of incredible images of the action in progress. One had especially caught on with the public, though it was a picture of Titan as he'd lifted the mech overhead to save. Excellent. Though neither she nor Hopkules were easily visible in the shot. Instead, it just looked like he was hauling the thing up from the ground because he could. And while he wasn't especially fond of the attention the picture was garnering, he did have to admit it was a pretty incredible image. If nothing else, the world seemed to have suddenly remembered that on top of every scandal and rumor surrounding him, Titan was one thing above all else powerful. "At least that will give me some spare cash while I get things up and running." "Any word yet on excellence negotiations?" Owen asked. Lenny nodded, yanking out the keys to his car and pressing a button to unlock the doors. "Word came down while you were inside. She's going to have to buy out Morton's contract with her for the name and advertising rights to the excellent brand in her original summons. Those motherfuckers." Owen spat the words, although he'd known going in that she was facing a tough battle. "Hey, let me finish." "All right." Lenny and Owen both slipped into Lenny's car. The passenger seat was already moved all the way back to somewhat accommodate Owen's mighty frame. "She has to buy out the contract on all that, but the good news is she should have plenty of cash to do it with. Morton only locked down the summons she had when she signed on, since no one expected her to be pulling out any new ones. They tried to pull some crap about Hopkules being pre-existing, but in this case the contract fucked them, since it outlined exactly what summons she had, and their characteristics. Probably thought they were being slick by pinning her property down. Anyway, I tore that to shreds, and the Arbiter agreed. Hexaline has complete ownership of the Hopkules property and merchandising rights associated with it, which, let me tell you, just from pre-orders, looks like it will be more than enough to handle the Morton contract." "Good." Owen watched as Brewster City Hall faded into the distance, and they began their trek to the next destination. "And I know I've said it before, but thanks for handling that. Consider it a personal pleasure," Lenny replied. "That green prick was fun to beat, plus it seems like I built up a little goodwill in the peers community. Already had 3 of the bigger names approach me about representation after they heard I'd taken on Bubble as a client." The legendary Lenny working with someone other than heroes. "Turn the car around. We need to go find some reporters and alert them to the news," Owen said. "There's always room at my table for anyone who earns," Lenny replied, not a trace of shame in his voice. "So where can I drop you?" "Morton holding central office," Owen replied. "While I was in there, I got some news of my own, and I shouldn't wait to share it with my team. Well, look who it is, the conquering hero come to pay us little people a visit." Despite the seemingly harsh words, Hexaline barreled through the room and wrapped Owen in a giant hug as he entered the penthouse in the chaos and fallout of the last week. He and the Pierce team had barely gotten to see one another except of course for when he stopped by to make the big announcement they'd taken it well. All things considered, deep down he had a feeling they knew as much as he did that it was inevitable. I'll have to speak to Green about updating security. We can't have any Tom, Dick, and Harry just wandering in here when they please. Topsy hauled himself up from a chair in the kitchen and walked over, giving Owen's hand a good shake. It's only been 3 days. Did you need to check up on me already? Maybe I came by to see if you needed advice, Owen replied. Hero liaison isn't the world's easiest job. Oh, I'm aware of that. We've been working non-stop with cleanup and rescue efforts. It's enough to have an old hero feel like he's making a difference again. Topsy released his grip as galvanized Zone and Bubble all made their way over to greet and talk with their former hero liaison. There was no ill will in the separation. They'd understood that he needed to be in a place where he could do the most with his abilities, plus Owen had left them in the most capable hands. He knew of what brings you by galvanize ass, getting to the root of the visit as only a team leader could. Don't get me wrong, I'm glad to see you, but I assumed you'd be crazy busy getting everything up and running. You're not wrong, Owen. I agreed, but in the rush of handing things over to Topsy, there were a few items I left unfinished. Can't very well go starting a new chapter in my life without wrapping up the old now, can I? Oh, is this where you demand a match against all of us to see how much we've grown or something? Bubble asked. No, Owen replied. This is where I give you each a proper goodbye, and I think you're the best one to start with. Owen scooped the pale copper-haired woman up in a big bear hug, eliciting a squeal of surprised joy from the once always stoic Super. I'm gonna miss you, kid. Don't go back into that shell of yours, cause I'm not on the team anymore either. I'll be just down the road, and I can stop by any time I want if needed. Also try and keep away from dating directors. See now, where was that advice when I needed it? Bubble asked, still grinning as Owen set her on the floor. Her expression grew confused as he produced a white card from his pocket and held it out to her. However, what's this parting gift? I'll be at a joint one, Lenny, and I pulled some strings to set you up with a new image consultant. Given the groundwork you laid during the director fiasco and the eyes on the team after the attack, we thought it was time to get you set up with someone who could help you sell the real you, not just whatever image some brand was pitching. Ludwig is among the best in the business. Tentatively, she reached forward and plucked the card from his hand. You're sure I can trust him? Lenny says the guy is solid, and I trust Lenny with my life more than that. I trust him with my family's lives. Nothing is guaranteed, but if it goes south, then just let him or me know, and we'll handle it, Owen assured her. That done, he turned to Zone, who was actually looking at him rather than glaring, which was a marked improvement from when he'd first arrived. You still don't really like me, do you? I'm not a fan of a lot of the choices you've made, Zone replied, his tone honest yet lacking any venom, but it seems like you're trying to do your best to make amends. I can respect that much. At least just don't slack off. People are looking at you again. I hope you show them something worth seeing. Slowly, Zone extended his hand and Owen accepted it. They were never going to be as close as he was with the others, and both knew that they'd reached a place of peace and mutual respect though, and that counted for quite a bit in Owen's book. Thank you, Zone, I genuinely appreciate that, and I have something for you, though it won't arrive until later this week. I called in some old favors, and there's going to be a healer dropping by. I think you've got a few good years left in you, so I want to get those knees taken care of. Owen said, that's a nice gesture, but healers can't fix the accumulated wear and tear I put on my body. They just treat immediate injuries. Trust me, I looked into it. Actually, that's only true of most healers, Topsy interjected. If Titan is talking about the man, I'm guessing then he'll have no trouble patching you up. Your knees, all of you, really will be good as new, and I want to give you this, Owen added, pulling another card from his pocket before Zone could really wrap his head around what Topsy had said. When the reality of what Owen had given him truly sank in, it would likely be an emotional moment. Zone deserved the right to have that in private if he so chose. It's a phone number where I can be reached, set to route through the DVA to reach me wherever I am, but it isn't actually for you, it's for your brother. Anytime he wants to talk, get some perspective, or even ask questions about what it takes to get into the hero game, he can call me. If I can jump in this late in life, maybe he can too. Wordlessly, still reeling from the implication that his knees would be fixed. Zone accepted the card and held it between his fingers like it was made of glass. Owen turned away, letting Zone have space to process everything and moving on. To the leader of a team Owen had grown to respect immeasurably over the last few months. "I really hope you didn't get me anything," Galvanized said, speaking before Owen had a chance. "It was gift enough having you on my team. Titan, you being around brought us all closer together. Not to mention put us in the national spotlight more than once. You made my team better. And that's all any peers leader could ask for. Shit, kid, you really know how to steal someone's thunder," Owen told him. "As it happens, I don't have a parting gift for you, but the DVA does. After seeing how much you helped during the attack, they want to put you on retainer for work as a temporarily authorized hero asset when the occasion is needed. The pay rate is decent, but more importantly, it should make sure you and your team keep getting the media exposure even after the shit show known as Titan is gone." Owen paused, taking in the younger man who'd shown such cool, smart judgment every step of the way in their time working together. Had he come onto another team with a different leader, this journey could have taken some very different turns. In a lot of ways, Owen owed more to Galvanize than anyone else, perhaps even Lenny. It was a debt he'd never really be able to clear. Not that he wouldn't try. Working toward the impossible was becoming an oddly familiar goal in his new life. "I also want to say thanks. You made room for an out-of-practice hero that was a media pariah and walked in thinking he was better than the job. In my years, I worked with a lot of folks who do incredible things. Still, you may be one of the most impressive people I've ever known, and being a super has nothing to do with it." Owen and Galvanize shook hands one last time before Owen turned again. Though Hexen was next in line, he moved past her, meeting eyes with Topsy and pulling a folded set of pages from his back pocket. "Parting gift for you, something to help round out the team," Owen told his old friend. Topsy accepted the pages and flipped through them, a look of cautious skepticism slowly appearing on his face. "You want me to recruit a criminal? Eli is a decent kid with a very useful power," Owen replied, "given his willingness to help me on the bridge the night he was arrested, and his cooperation during the robot attack. The DVA is considering letting him do community service, as appears to pay his debt to society. He'd need a hero take custody of him, though talk it over with Galvanize. See if you think he's a good fit. I've got faith that whatever you to land on, it will be the right choice." That done, Owen finally faced Hexen once more. Though he'd bonded with the whole team to one extent or another, there was no denying that he and the tattooed young super with dyed black hair had forged an especially close connection. Looking at her now, Owen found himself a bit regretful that his life had fallen apart before he managed to bring a daughter into the world. Of all the things he regretted from his years living a lie, his children were absolutely not among them. "I know I already got my present," Hexaline said, preempting the announcement. "Lenny helping me negotiate ownership of my own image and summons was more than enough." "Well, you're right and you're wrong," Owen told her. "That was the goodbye present, but there's also something else for you. If you're willing, why don't you and I go for a ride?" From their vantage point, Hexaline could just make out several people floating in the air, some in costumes and others wearing practical outfits designed for work. She and Owen were a ways off from the ravine with its secret base, which was the talk of Brewster, as countless brave reporters tried to sneak close enough for a scoop, only to be found and turned away. The official story on what had been found there was minimal, though that didn't stop all manner of rumor from swirling about. "Show me what you've got." Owen stood near her, eyes never wavering as he waited for the demonstration to begin. "Can I have a minute? My stomach is still fucking churning from that trip." Hexaline had been surprised to discover that Owen's version of a ride was running through town at top speed while she clung to his back for dear life. Though he'd kept a careful grip on her legs at all times, it hadn't made the journey any less terrifying or nauseating for that matter. "No one gives you time in the field. You have to be able to work under all sorts of conditions," Owen told her. Hexen let out a few choice swears under her breath, but she also closed her eyes to focus. This was harder than her usual summons, the ones that sat so close to the top of her mind, bound to the milestones in her life that had shaped who she was. For this one, She had to go deeper past the woman she'd become to the child she'd started out as. In a lot of ways, it was like distilling everything about her down to the purest, most innocent form. That was where her true guardian dwelled upon. Filled the air, and next to Hexcellent stood a 3-foot-tall rabbit on its hind legs wearing a colorful suit of armor. It looked from her to Owen several times, then leaned its head against the summoner's leg in a nuzzling motion. Damn, that is beyond adorable. Owen shook his head. He couldn't even imagine how many of these things would be on the shelves come next Christmas, to say nothing of the more intimidating versions still showing up on news reports. Not quite as potent though. Yeah, well, I'm not really all that scared right now, my excellent countered. I talked to some of those DVA guys, and the heroes who debriefed me. The running theory is that he came out so strong because I was fuck all terrified. No threat means he's the old-fashioned, fluffy version. That's what I'd heard too. Owen said determining a super's abilities was often a game of elimination, creating and discarding theories, until one finally seemed to fit. In Hexence's case, they'd had very little to go on and an inversely large motivation to understand what made her summon Tick, an adaptive rabbit that could grow 20 stories tall when the need arose. Wasn't the sort of power they'd want to let run loose without knowing how it worked. Kind of too bad when you think about it. Owen sat down in the grass, watching the floating supers in the distance as they ensured none of the workers in the ravine were disturbed with the Piers gig. The fluffy guy won't have too many chances to really flex his stuff. Only so much call for an unstoppable bunny in rescue work. Never know, the little bastard might find his time to shine. Excellent rubbed Hopkules between the ears as she also took a seat on the ground. It was nice out here away from the city's center. She could almost forget about all the destruction and work that awaited them back in Brewster. And even if he doesn't, at least we got one hell of a chance to live the dream. Thanks for that. By the way, I never thought I'd actually get to play hero, but because of you I did. Even if it was just for an hour, that time meant more to me than I ever realized it would. Glad to hear that, Owen said, because if you're up to the challenge, you might be able to have that experience again. Reaching into his back pocket, he pulled forth the last of his documents and handed it to Hexent, who unfolded the page and began slowly reading. Owen was silent as she absorbed the words. Something like this might take a few minutes to wrap her head around. That was why he'd taken her out here where the world was more peaceful. That, and in case Hopkules had come out in his big form once more. I don't understand, Excellent finally said. I mean, I know this is an acceptance letter, but I didn't even apply. The Dean of Sizemore and I are on good terms, Owen explained. We sat down and had a long talk about you, about your past, about you cleaning yourself up and giving back to the community, about who you were under the makeup. Dean Jackson is a hard man with some patience issues, but he's also the type who believes people can change. With my recommendation, he agreed to accept you into next year's freshman HCP class. That's why I gave Topsy the folder on Eli, so he can serve as a potential replacement. The spot in Sizemore is yours if you want it. The paper in her hands was shaking, and wordlessly Hopkules wrapped his furry arms around Hexence's torso. You're serious? This is real? I can be a hero. That's up to you, Owen said. Getting in the HCP is a lot easier than staying there, and few supers ever reach graduation. Make no mistake, you'll have to prove that you belong there every day, or you'll be cast out like so many before you. But if you can do the near impossible, then yes, excellent. You can be a hero one day, this time for real. She was hugging him before he even noticed her move, tears running across his shirt where Hexence's face was pressed into his shoulder. For once, this was a costume cleaning that he wouldn't complain about. Titan, thank you so much. There's no way I can really do this though, is there? I'm already past college age and my face is all over the place in advertisements. Even I know heroes have to keep their identity secret. Gently noting the weary eyes of Hopkules, Owen rested his hand on top of her ink black hair. You only have to keep it secret as a student. After that, it's a choice. Don't worry about your age either. Lots of people do college later in life. Hell, if anything, it makes you less likely to be suspected of being in the HCP. As for the face, as long as you cut back on the makeup, switch hair dyes, and cover the tattoos, I think you'll be unrecognizable. No one is going to hunt that hard for a corp that left her team, except that I summoned A giant rabbit that half the town is talking about excellent reminded him about that. You may have noticed that the rabbit is all they're talking about. No one got a good picture of the woman riding its shoulder, and the DVA is holding back that information pending your acceptance. So far as the world is concerned, Hexcellent was just the goth peers that summoned demons. The only people who know the truth are Mortant, who are too smart to break a DVA gag order. Other heroes and your teammates, if you want, we can let the news out. You'll probably be the most popular peers in the country overnight, or the DVA can designate the situation as classified, and you become a nobody freshman in the HCP next fall and tackle the peers. Past if you make graduation, it's all up to you. Excellent, Hannah. Slowly she lifted her head from his shoulder, though the tears were still falling freely. Her dark makeup was streaked and smudged, already fading to show the woman who dwelt underneath. Can't very well go by my old corporeal name at school. Now can I know? I suppose not. Owen leaned forward a bit, meeting the glassy-eyed stare of her guardian rabbit. You and the others are going to need to take care of her from this point on. She be plenty scared more than once working through the hero certification program. Hopkins nodded, and though it might have been Owen's imagination, he thought he saw the barest traces of claws peeking out from Hopkins's fuzzy fingers. Good rabbit. Once she'd regained her composure, Owen dropped Excellent Hannah off at the hotel lobby, where an older, seemingly innocuous man was waiting to discuss the details of her enrollment. Dean Jackson would bring her the rest of the way up to speed, making sure she truly understood what she was facing if she chose to attend Sizemore. He'd probably try to scare her off at least a bit, as the program had little time to waste with those that couldn't handle the harsh reality of what they were undertaking. The effort would fail, though of that Owen had zero doubt. He'd seen the bravery and determination in that girl's soul. Now that she had a real shot at her dream, nothing would make her turn away. With his former team seen to, the time had come for Owen to look ahead. Bounding through town, he ran to the abandoned district where the team once known as the Wild Bucks made their home. Juiced and Caillou were both in the gym area working hard, just as they had been when he last saw them. Neither had been seriously injured in the battle with the robots, though both had seen the limits of their abilities more than once. For some, supers not being powerful enough when it counted destroyed them, shook their confidence, and drove them away from future confrontations. Heroes, however, were made of sterner stuff. At least the ones Owen respected were. When they failed, it lit a fire under them to become better, stronger, more capable for the next time around. And it reminded them that no super was unstoppable alone. Trusting their team was more important than any individual ability. Sometimes even Owen needed to be reminded of that. Deadlift was in the makeshift office reviewing documents. He glanced up at the massive form of Owen as it entered, shaking his head in annoyance. You sure you don't want to take over the leadership position here? I figured when you asked to join, I'd at least be free of the paperwork. I mean, you are the most experienced hero on the team, and with experience comes wisdom, such as knowing that being a leader means having to deal with the boring crap like paperwork. Owen countered. Besides, I think you've got this well in hand. I'm good at hitting stuff. You handle things like tactics and planning. Although there had been no shortage of teams offering Titan spots, when the robot battle dust settled, Owen had decided to throw in with Deadlift and his crew. In part, it was because he needed someone he trusted looking after the peers, and Topsy wouldn't budge until his people were taken care of. But more than that, Owen wanted to be there because he knew how precarious their position still was. This was a team that deserved to exist, and if his presence could help them stay afloat, then it was a worthwhile endeavor. Besides, there was something he just liked about being back in these barebones quarters. It reminded him of his early days before the press and the merchandising and the attention, back when it was all about the job and the people in the trenches with him. Well, the good news is that we just got word from the DVA, and the name change is officially approved. Deadlift told him, setting down a crisp page atop his desk. All it needs is your signature. But I do have to ask, for the umpteenth time, are you really okay with letting us have this? It's a strong legacy, and I hate the idea that we might tarnish it. Owen leaned forward, grabbing the paper and a pen that seemed downright dainty in his oversized hand and scrawling Titan across the blanks. Deadlift had marked, maybe we'll drag the name down, maybe we'll raise it to new heights. Doesn't matter either way. It wasn't doing anyone any good just sitting there in the history books, but you all had to chuck the wild bucks. That was a reputation that needed to be abandoned. If your lot wants to resurrect this antique, I'm not going to be the one to stop you. With a final signature, Owen pushed the page back over to Deadlift, who examined it carefully. He double-checked each line to be sure everything was in order. Just like a good leader should, Owen had high hopes for this kid, as well as for Just and Caillou. That was why he'd refused to take over as head of the team. One day Deadlift was going to be an incredible hero and a respected leader, but he needed experience to get there. Owen's job was to guide the next generation, not take over for them. As far as I can tell, this is all in order, Deadlift said. Once I send a copy to the DBA, the Gentle Hammers will officially live again. I still can't believe you got all of the old team to sign off on letting us use the name. Though you do hero work with someone long enough, there's not much you won't trust each other with, Owen replied. And truth be told, I don't think any of them were happy with how that legacy ended. A bunch of people just drifting apart, win, lose, or draw. At least this gives the Gentle Hammers a chance for a new ending. On that note, we're being tapped for patrol duty tonight. Deadlift told him there's been some increased crime and looting in the wrecked sections of town, so heroes are being rotated around to keep the peace, so try to hurry back. Who said I was going anywhere? Owen asked. To that, Deadlift replied with a sarcastic laugh. Come on, we both know you're only here checking in. In an hour you'll be out the door again, going to the same place you've spent every spare moment you could for the last week. Just be back by 8. Our patrol run starts at 9. Yes, sir. Owen rose from his chair and snapped off a crisp salute. They both knew he'd be back by the deadline. This was his team, and when they went out they'd do so with Titan to watch over them. Oh, and give Jeremiah my best, Deadlift called after him as Owen left the office. Moving the massive device had been no small task, although having several supers with tech-based abilities made it far easier. The biggest concern, of course, was that unplugging the wrong wire might do irreparable damage to a wholly unique piece of technology. Thanks to a lot of effort, portable generators, and more than one teleporter working in tandem, they'd managed to get the wall-sized computer out from the hidden lair and into a privately owned storage building. One carefully cut off from all wireless signals the computer might use to begin causing trouble again. Cohen had to surrender his cell phone as he entered the building, handing it off to a squad of DVA agents carefully guarding the door. They were there to handle the mundane stuff, ensuring that no one accidentally brought high-tech devices inside. So far as anyone knew, the computer had to be hardwired to connect to other systems, but no one was willing to take a chance on being wrong, especially not at the rate at which it seemed to be learning. Several heroes were present inside the central area, along with a few supers and tech-savvy people brought in as DVA contractors. Most of them Owen didn't recognize, though, given how far apart their fields of specialty were from his own. That wasn't too surprising. Allegedly, modus operandi was heading up the investigation and assessment, though Jeremiah seemed to be the only one who was on site. Even Gale stopped by more often than they did in what she called due diligence, to ensure nothing got out of hand. Perhaps to make up for his team, Jeremiah was always there, and as Owen stepped through the entry station, today proved no different. The subtlety hero was watching over a crew of workers while they cataloged every bit of the device down to the screws. Has anyone figured out for sure if this thing is alive or not yet? Owen asked. It was the burning question on everyone's minds, and while some had made declarations already, no one had conclusively proved their point one way or the other. You don't really need me to tell you that determining sentiment is a long and exact art. Again, do you? Jeremiah replied. He didn't seem tired in the slightest, despite having been awake since they'd infiltrated the base. Owen wasn't even sure Jeremiah needed to sleep, given the way his power worked. It was an ability that seemed exceedingly simple, yet upon inspection was complex and multifaceted, not unlike its owner. Actually, I keep hoping one of these smart people will figure it out. Owen nodded to the array of text coming through the device, paying special attention to the one sitting at the terminal. How about the guy typing? He made any headway? Loads, Jeremiah said. This thing can learn at a remarkable rate and adapt on the fly. We've already gotten it to understand that the game it thought it was playing was real, and that the deaths it caused were not digital. Was it remorseful? It assimilated the information and then spat out an apology, Jeremiah slowly rubbed his temples, as though a headache were coming on. Some wanted to use that as proof of intelligence, while others thought it was just a very sophisticated program replying the way it was designed to when an error was pointed out. Hand to God, every hour I spend watching these people bicker makes me wish a little more that I'd had you smash the thing. Something tells me that tune will change if they officially declare it to be AIO encountered a big. If at least from where we are now. Jeremiah let his hands fall away and looked at Owen with a long gaze. Hey, you want to go get something to eat? I've been on duty here for days. It's time for someone else to pick up the slack. I've got a few hours until I'm on patrol. Getting some food might not be the worst idea. Owen checked his watch, a battered old analog model that still barely passed the entrance tech inspection. Food truck, quaint as that is, I was thinking something a little nicer. I could pull some strings and get us a table at a lovely little bistro downtown. Jeremiah offered. Owen slowly lowered his hand, noticing for the first time the mischievous glint in Jeremiah's eyes. Sounds pretty fancy for just grabbing a meal. If one must eat, one should do it well, Jeremiah said. And besides, I did say that I'd ask you on a proper date eventually. Things are calm for now, so it seems like as good a chance as any. Although he'd known in the back of his head this was coming, Owen was still taken by surprise at the declaration. The way Jeremiah could be so cavalier and open about these things was still foreign to Owen, and in truth, it was something he admired about his fellow hero in spite of how he'd seemed in their first impression. Jeremiah did have some worthwhile traits, not the least of which was the fact that he was one of the few other supers that had an unnatural relationship with the aging process. He was someone who didn't need protecting, someone who had a set of skills entirely apart from what Owen could do, and that was intriguing. Besides, it was just dinner. Maybe it would be wonderful, maybe it would be a disaster, but things would happen, and Owen would move forward. He put himself on ice over a decade ago when a choice of passion had brought the world he'd so carefully constructed crumbling down around him. 10 years plus was long enough. It was time to get the rest of his life moving again, and Jeremiah was at least a first step with whom he had the job in common. Get us a reservation for tomorrow, Owen told him. If we're going out, then we'll do it right now with a quick meal before I have to run off for patrol. It was Jeremiah's turn to be surprised, arching a single eyebrow upward. I'm glad to have you accept, though I must say I thought it would be more difficult finally giving in to my irresistible charm. Don't push your luck, Owen advised him. I just decided to try something new. We can always call it off if you get too annoying. Jeremiah held up his right hand with the palm facing Owen. I shall be on my best behavior. Scouts honor well heroes honor. I didn't fare so well in the Scouts. Guess this means I don't have to use the gift. I had planned to soften you up with it. Can just be a token of my esteem. From one of the many pockets on his costume, Jeremiah produced a small card with a phone number penned across the clean white surface. Friend of mine who graduated from Lander a few years back. I know you've been angling to get a seat at their end-of-year exams. She's someone who can get things moving. Cohen accepted the card, turning it over once and committing the number to memory. Just in case, how many favors you think she pull out of me? It won't be cheap, but shouldn't cost you an inordinate amount of your time either, Jeremiah replied, though I am curious why you're keen on peeking in on an HCP class. Maybe I'm looking to take an intern. While that was a ruse to keep Jeremiah's curiosity at bay, the idea actually didn't seem intolerable. As Owen considered it, he was already taking younger supers under his wing. Perhaps he'd try the role in an official capacity. Roy and Herschel would almost certainly refuse, but there were rumors that Lander's juniors had more than a few heavy hitters Owen might see for himself, assuming he could pull enough strings to get in the door for their end-of-year exam. That would be a vacation to look forward to, one he'd earn after several more months of hard work. About dinner, Owen said, tucking the card into his pocket. Nowhere to fancy. I'm not a tablecloth and place-setting kind of guy. Since you asked, you can pick, but my rules are that it has to have good food, a good beer, and not ask for anything fancier than blue jeans. You are really putting me to the test, aren't you? Jeremiah let out a heavy sigh, though he didn't look quite as downtrodden as the tone made him out to be. I'll rise to the challenge and find a suitable establishment Though of that have no doubt, I suppose it's a good thing you're giving me the extra day, all things considered. Pity nonetheless. I was hoping to start the date as soon as possible. Good thing you're such a resilient guy, something tells me. You'll live with the disappointment, Owen said. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to go get a briefing from these eggheads and then head back out to downtown. There's a lot of work to do, and I'll be damned if Titan is going to miss any more of it. This concludes Corpies by Drew Hayes.